My sister talked my parents into signing their house over to her and then laughed. I thought, now you have nowhere to live. She thought she had one, until the lawyer smiled and said actually that house was never theirs to give. When she found out who really owned it, she was shocked and fell apart. I was standing in my parents' living room, staring at my sister as she smirked at me. She had her arms crossed, her head tilted, and that annoying little smile on her face. She always looked like that when she thought she had won. Well, she said slowly, like she was enjoying it. Looks like you're out of luck. Mom and Dad signed the house over to me this morning. It's mine now. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. This was my childhood home, where I took my first steps, where we celebrated birthdays, where I stayed up late talking to my mom in the kitchen. And now my sister was looking right at me, bragging that she owned it and that I had nowhere to live. She even laughed, a loud, proud laugh. You should have been smarter, she said. You should have known better. I couldn't believe it. I turned to my parents, looking for an explanation or some kind of denial. But my mom wouldn't look at me. My dad just sighed and rubbed his head, avoiding my eyes. They knew what they had done, and they had done it on purpose. I clenched my fists. Why would you do this? My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. Why would you give her the house? You know I live here. You know I've been the one taking care of everything. My mom finally looked at me, but there was no guilt in her eyes, just tiredness. She's family, she said. She's my family too, I snapped. That's my house as much as it is yours. My sister laughed. Was, she corrected, not anymore. I had worked so hard to keep this house going. When my dad got sick, I was the one who drove him to his appointments. When my mom couldn't pay the bills, I stepped in. I had spent my time, my money, and my energy keeping this place together. And now my sister, who had never done anything for anyone but herself, had taken it from me. I gritted my teeth. This isn't over, I said. She just rolled her eyes. Oh, it is. Legally, the house is mine now. You can't do anything about it. And honestly, I think it's time you found your own place. You're almost 40, right? It's sad that you're still living here. My hands were shaking. I could barely breathe. She had no idea what she had just done, and she had no idea what was coming for her. Because what she didn't know, what none of them had even checked, was that this house was never really theirs to give. And the moment the lawyer smiled, I knew I had already won. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't yell or demand answers. I just stood there, staring at my sister as she grinned like she had won some big battle. Because she thought she had. She thought she'd have played the perfect game, that she had tricked our parents and beaten me to take the one thing that mattered most. She had no idea what she had really done. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said, my voice calm. If that's how you want to play this. Her smile faded for a second, but she quickly covered it up. Oh, it's not about how I want to play, she said. The paperwork is already done. You can complain all you want, but you can't change legal ownership. She really thought she had me trapped. I turned around and left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't storm out in anger. I just walked out, got in my car, and drove straight to my lawyer's office. Because while my sister had spent months planning, she had made one huge mistake. She hadn't checked who really owned the house. My lawyer, Mr. Reynolds, was an older man who had seen it all. When I told him what had happened, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands over his stomach. Let me get this straight, he said. Your parents signed the house over to your sister. I nodded. This morning. And they think they have the legal right to do that. I nodded again. That's when Mr. Reynolds smiled, a slow, knowing smile that told me I was about to win. Actually, he said, tapping his pen on the desk, that house was never theirs to give. A chill went down my spine. What do you mean? He opened his drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and dropped it on the desk in front of me. You want to know who really owns that house? I stared at him, my heart racing. He opened the file and pointed to a document. You do. I blinked. What? Your grandfather left it to you in his will, he said, sliding the paperwork closer. Legally, that house has been yours since he passed away. Your parents never owned it. They had the right to live there, but they never had the right to give it away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All these years, I had thought my parents owned the house. I had never even thought to check the deed. I had just trusted that things were the way they seemed. But my grandfather, who had always liked me more than my sister and had seen what kind of person she was, had left the house to me, and my sister had no idea. I let out a slow breath. So what happens now? Mr. Reynolds' smile grew. Now? Now we have some fun. Your sister's world is about to fall apart. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I stayed at a friend's place and let my lawyer handle everything. The next morning, he filed an official order to stop my sister from making any changes to the property. That meant no selling, no fixing it up, no moving in. And that's when she finally called me. I didn't answer the first 3 times. On the 4th call, I picked up. What the hell did you do? She screamed. I leaned back in my chair. What do you mean? She was furious. The lawyer just called me. He said I can't touch the house. He said it's not mine. I let the silence hang for a moment to make her nervous. Then I said, that's because it never was. She went quiet. You really should have checked who owned the house before you tried your little trick. I said, because legally, that house has been mine for years. No, she whispered. That's not possible. Oh, it is. I have the papers to prove it. Grandpa left it to me, not Mom and Dad, and definitely not you. She gasped. I could almost hear her mind racing. No, that's a lie. That's not true. Mom and Dad. They didn't own it. I cut in. They thought they did, but they were wrong. I heard a small gasp on the other end. I wasn't sure if it was from shock or anger. Now, I said, my voice calm, you have 2 choices. 1, you admit you messed up, back off, and we pretend this never happened. Or 2, I paused, you push your luck, and we take this to court. You wouldn't, she whispered. I laughed. Oh, I absolutely would. And trust me, if this goes to court, you're going to lose. For the first time in her life, my sister had nothing to say. She had spent so long playing her little games, turning people against each other, tricking our parents into giving her what she wanted. And now she was realizing she had lost before she even started. The next morning, she showed up at my lawyer's office. She stormed in, red-faced and angry, demanding that something be done. She yelled, she threatened. She even tried to say I had stolen the house. Mr. Reynolds, my lawyer, just sat there calmly, letting her dig her own hole. When she finally stopped ranting, he leaned forward, tapped the legal papers on his desk, and said, I'd suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself even more. That's when it happened. She collapsed into the chair, her face turning pale. For the first time ever, she looked defeated. This isn't fair, she whispered. I crossed my arms. Trying to steal a house from your own brother isn't fair either. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. But I already told people the house was mine. I made plans. I tilted my head. That sounds like a you problem. She opened her mouth but couldn't say anything. That's when I knew she finally realized it. She had lost. For a few days, my sister stayed quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, she had accepted defeat. But I should have known better. People like her don't just give up. They find new ways to cause trouble. And my sister. She was about to sink lower than I ever imagined. It started with my parents. They showed up at my house early one morning, knocking like they still owned the place. I thought about ignoring them, but I knew they wouldn't leave. So I opened the door. My mom looked at me like I had betrayed her. How could you do this to your sister? I laughed dryly. Are you serious? She's family, my dad said, shaking his head. You're really going to kick her out over some technicality? I stared at them, trying to understand how they could say something so ridiculous. A technicality, I repeated. She tried to steal my house. She didn't steal it, my mom snapped. We gave it to her. And you never had the right to give it away, I shot back. Do you even hear yourselves? You tried to give away something that wasn't yours. They didn't respond because, deep down, they knew I was right. But then my mom tried another approach. She softened her voice, sighed like she was the victim, and said, Look, your sister made a mistake, okay? But you don't have to punish her for it. Just let her stay. I almost laughed in her face. Let her stay, I repeated. In my house? Yes, my dad said, crossing his arms. It's not like you're married or have kids. You don't need all this space. Oh, so that's what this was. They had decided I didn't deserve the house. That my sister, their favorite, needed it more than I did. And they expected me to just let it happen. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Let me make something very clear. She is never setting foot in this house again. And neither are you. I went to court with my lawyer, completely calm. My sister showed up looking smug, like she was sure the judge would side with her. For the first 5 minutes, she put on a good act. She talked about how our parents had given her the house, how I was refusing to leave, and how I was being difficult out of spite. The judge listened quietly. Then my lawyer stood up and laid out the facts. He showed the real deed to the house, proving I had owned it for years. He showed my grandfather's will, which left the house only to me. And then he dropped the bombshell. He showed the fake eviction notice my sister had filed. The judge did not like that. She turned to my sister, her face serious. Miss, do you know that falsifying legal documents is a serious crime? My sister smirked, disappeared. She turned pale. You filed an eviction notice against the legal owner of the house. The judge continued. That's fraud. My sister stammered, looking at my parents for help. But for the first time, even they couldn't save her. She had lost again. But this time, she wasn't just losing the house. She was about to lose everything. The courtroom was silent. My sister looked like she was about to faint. My parents sat frozen behind her, their faces white. The judge tapped her pen on the desk. Miss, you knowingly filed false legal documents to try to remove the rightful owner from their home. That's a criminal offense. My sister opened her mouth but couldn't speak. The judge continued, I'm ruling in favor of the defendant. The house legally belongs to him. Also, I'm referring this case for possible charges of fraud and perjury. That was it. That was the moment everything fell apart for her. She turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. You wouldn't let them charge me, right? I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. Why shouldn't I? Tears filled her eyes. I didn't mean. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I tilted my head. You laughed in my face when you thought you won. You told me I had nowhere to live. She went silent because she knew I was right. The judge finalized the ruling, throwing out my sister's fake case and making it clear she would be investigated. But I wasn't done. My parents get what they deserve. After court, my parents cornered me outside. My mom looked at me with tears in her eyes. You can't do this to her. I scoffed. She did it to herself. She's facing fraud charges. My dad snapped. And whose fault is that? I shot back. I didn't tell her to forge legal documents. I didn't tell her to try to steal from me. That was her choice. But she's your sister, my mom pleaded. I clenched my jaw. And I'm your son. But that didn't stop you from trying to kick me out of my own house, did it? They had nothing to say to that. So I hit them with the final blow. You know what? Since you're so worried about her, why don't we take her in? I said, tilting my head, because she's definitely not coming back to my house. My mom gasped. You wouldn't. Oh, I would. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my notes. In fact, I already had my lawyer write up a formal eviction notice for both of you. My dad's face turned red. You can't evict your own parents. Why not? I shot back. You didn't seem to have a problem trying to do it to me. Silence. My mom started crying, shaking her head. Where will we go? I shrugged. That's not my problem. Because the truth was, they had made their choice. They had chosen my sister over me. They had tried to take my home. And now they had nothing. The eviction went through. My parents tried to fight it, but they had no legal ground. They packed up their things and left, dragging my sister with them. They ended up in a small apartment on the other side of town, far from the nice, big house they thought they'd live in forever. As for my sister, she was charged with fraud. The court didn't go easy on her. She got a big fine and a criminal record. And the best part? That perfect image she had built for herself, the one she used to manipulate everyone, was gone. No more bragging about her big win. No more looking down on me. Now when people talked about her, it wasn't about how smart or clever she was. It was about how she tried to steal from her own brother and failed miserably. I still live in my house. My house. It's quiet now. Peaceful. No more fights. No more betrayals. Just me, finally enjoying what was always meant to be mine. And my parents, my sister, I don't hear from them much these days. But every now and then, I get updates. I hear my sister is struggling to find work because of her criminal record, that my parents regret choosing her over me, that they whisper about how they lost everything. And you know what? I don't feel bad. Not even a little. Because they tried to ruin my life. And all they did was ruin their own.
My younger sister called me, crying, saying that Grandpa was in the ICU and that I should go quickly to save him. I rushed to the hospital, but upon reaching, Grandpa was not there. I checked my phone and was shocked. My sister had faked Grandpa's illness and was now marrying my wealthy fiancé. I quickly moved to the event, and they were shocked to see me. I just laughed because the man she was marrying was actually... I used to believe that family was everything. That no matter how hard life got, no matter what obstacles stood in the way, the people you loved the most would always be there for you. I was wrong. Betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people you trust the most. Just days before my wedding, I sat in my Chicago apartment, sipping coffee, staring at my wedding invitations spread across the table. Everything was perfect. The venue was booked, the guests were confirmed, and my dream dress was hanging neatly in my closet. In less than a week, I would walk down the aisle to marry Noah Bennett, the man I thought was the love of my life. I had spent years building a life in Chicago. I wasn't just an ordinary woman waiting for a fairy tale marriage. I was a successful real estate developer, managing multi-million-dollar projects, closing deals, and making a name for myself in a city full of competition. And Noah? He was a well-respected investment banker, always dressed in sleek suits, always talking about the next big deal. We were a power couple, or at least that's what I believed. Then my phone rang. The second I saw my younger sister's name, Madison, flash on the screen, I hesitated. Madison and I had always had a complicated relationship. She was 4 years younger than me, always reckless, always craving attention. Growing up, she had a way of making everything about herself, always stepping into my shadow and trying to steal the light. But this time, she sounded different.
Panicked.
Hysterical. Sophia,
She sobbed.
you need to come right away. It's Grandpa.
He's in the ICU.
It's bad. It's really bad. My heart stopped.
Wait, what? Grandpa?
The ICU. I gripped my phone tighter, already standing up. What happened? He collapsed at home. They rushed him to the hospital, she cried. The doctors won't tell me much, but they said it doesn't look good. I felt my knees weaken.
Grandpa.
My rock. My anchor. The man who raised Madison and me after our parents died. I'll be there soon, I said without hesitation. I grabbed my suitcase, threw in some clothes, and booked the earliest flight to New York. Noah wasn't home, so I sent him a quick text. Something happened to Grandpa. Flying to New York. Call you soon. No reply. I didn't think much of it. I figured he was busy finalizing last-minute wedding details. But now, looking back, I wonder if he was already standing at the altar when I sent that message. The flight felt endless. I couldn't sit still. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept picturing Grandpa lying in a hospital bed, barely breathing, doctors rushing around him. I tried calling Madison again, but it went straight to voicemail. The second the plane landed, I rushed to the hospital, running through the automatic doors, praying I wasn't too late. I nearly slammed into the front desk. I need to see William Carter. He was brought into the ICU. The nurse frowned, flipping through her records. I'm sorry, but there's no William Carter admitted here. My heart dropped. That can't be right. He was brought in today. My sister told me. The nurse shook her head. Are you sure you have the right hospital? I took a step back, confusion clouding my mind. Yes, I'm sure. My sister said. Something was wrong. I pulled out my phone and called Madison. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. The confusion twisted into fear. I grabbed a cab, giving the driver Grandpa's address. I didn't know what to expect. Had they moved him? Was he already discharged? Why wasn't Madison answering? The whole drive, I felt like I was suffocating. My hands were clammy. My head was spinning. Something was wrong. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found when I arrived. The moment I opened the door to Grandpa's house, my breath caught in my throat. There he was, standing in the kitchen.
Smiling. Completely fine.
Sweetheart, Grandpa beamed, setting his coffee down. What a surprise. What are you doing here? I froze. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. He was fine.
Not in the ICU.
Not even sick. I blinked. Grandpa, you're okay? He chuckled, raising an eyebrow. Of course I'm okay. Why wouldn't I be? My heart pounded. Madison called me. I whispered. She said you were in the ICU. That you collapsed. That it was serious. Grandpa frowned. The ICU? I haven't even had a cold this year. Are you sure you heard her right? I felt like my entire body went cold. It was a lie. The hospital. The ICU. The emergency. All of it. A sick feeling rose in my stomach as I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking. I clicked on Instagram, opening Madison's page. And there it was. A wedding photo. Madison, standing at an altar, wearing my wedding dress, holding Noah's hand, both of them smiling like they hadn't just destroyed my world. I stared at the caption, the words blurring before my eyes. Sorry, sis, but sometimes love can't wait. I couldn't breathe. I had left my home, my wedding, my life in Chicago intact. I had rushed across the country thinking my grandfather was dying, and instead, my sister married my fiancé. My hands trembled. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, trying to keep myself from collapsing. Grandpa's voice was far away, but I could hear the sharp edge in it. Sophia? What's wrong? I swallowed hard. I need a second. I turned away, stepping outside, gasping for air.
My phone buzzed in my hands.
A text. Daniel Rossi. My mentor. A man who had guided me through my career, who had helped me navigate the real estate world and the power games in business. It's done. You now own 55% of Bennett Capital. Congratulations. I stared at the message, barely processing it. Bennett Capital. Noah's company. The investment firm he had spent years building. The company he had been desperate to save for the past 6 months. He had fought tooth and nail for funding, nearly bankrupting himself trying to hold it together. And now the majority of it belonged to me. Noah had spent months hiding his company's struggles from me, but I had found out through my own connections. And I had done what any intelligent businesswoman would do. I had outmaneuvered him. I had planned to surprise him after our honeymoon, to show him that I had saved his company out of love.
But now?
Now, it wasn't about saving him. It was about destroying him. I took a slow, deep breath, a cold calm settling over me. I wasn't the kind of woman to cry. I wasn't the kind of woman to beg for explanations.
No.
I played to win. And Madison and Noah? They had no idea what was coming. I don't remember how long I stood outside Grandpa's house, staring at my phone. My mind was a mess, my body felt numb, and the world around me blurred into nothing. The betrayal was too big, too overwhelming, for me to process all at once. My sister. My fiancé. The wedding that was supposed to be mine. It was all happening while I was running through an airport, desperate to save a grandfather who had never even been sick. I forced myself to breathe, to think. Madison had set this up carefully. She had waited for the right moment, created the perfect excuse to get me out of the city. She had stolen my wedding dress, taken my place, and without hesitation, she had walked down the aisle in front of our friends, our family, our colleagues, and married Noah, the man who had whispered to me just last week that he couldn't wait to call me his wife. The memory of his voice, his arms around me, made me sick to my stomach. I wasn't naive. People betray each other every day. I had seen it in business, partners double-crossing each other, backroom deals killing careers overnight. But I had never imagined it would happen to me, from the two people I trusted the most. I wanted answers. I wanted to scream, to demand why, but deep down, I knew there was only one reason. Money. Madison had always been reckless with it, burning through whatever Grandpa left her.
Noah?
He was drowning, trying to keep Bennett Capital afloat, hiding it from everyone. They needed each other. She had the money he wanted, and he had the charm she always craved. They must have thought I was a fool, that I would break, that I would disappear, humiliated and weak. But I didn't break. I don't break. Instead, I smiled. A slow, bitter smile, because they had no idea what they had just done. I had left Chicago thinking I had everything. I was returning knowing I had more than they ever expected. I booked the next flight back, my hand steady as I checked my phone one last time. My grip tightened as I stared at Daniel's text. I now owned 55% of Bennett Capital. I had control over everything Noah had tried to save. The moment I stepped off the plane in Chicago, I called Olivia Price, my best friend, my closest confidant, and a journalist who always had her ear to the ground. "Are you home?" I asked, my voice calm. There was a pause. "Sophia?" Olivia's voice sharpened with concern. "You're back? I thought you were in New York for your grandfather." "He's fine," I cut in. "He was never in the ICU." A heavy silence. Then Olivia cursed under her breath. "Tell me you're joking." "I wish I was." I sighed, stepping into a cab. "I need you to come over. Now." 20 minutes later, Olivia walked into my apartment, her arms crossed, her brown eyes narrowed. "Start talking." I told her everything. The fake hospital call, the flight, Grandpa's confusion, and finally, the wedding photos. When I was done, she let out a slow breath. "I should have known something was off," she muttered. "I saw the photos this morning and thought it was some kind of joke. I kept waiting for you to call and tell me they were fake." I scoffed. "I wish." Her expression darkened. "This isn't just betrayal, Sophia. This is humiliation.
Public.
Intentional. They wanted you to see those photos." I already knew that. Madison had posted them knowing I would be scrolling through my phone, devastated, lost. She wanted to make a statement. She had won. But she was wrong. I turned my phone around, showing Olivia Daniels' message. Her eyes widened. "Wait, you own Bennett Capital?" 55% of it, I confirmed. A slow, wicked smile spread across her lips. They really have no idea what they just walked into. I sat back, feeling a new kind of calm settle over me. No, they don't. But they will. That night, I was invited to their wedding celebration dinner at La Bella Vita. Not directly, of course. But Madison's friends were careless on social media, posting videos, tagging the restaurant, making it easy to find. I didn't hesitate. I slipped into a sleek black dress, tied my hair back, and walked straight through the doors of La Bella Vita, ignoring the stares that followed me. The restaurant was packed, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. And right in the center, Madison and Noah sat together, glowing, surrounded by friends and business associates. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the host and smiled. "Table for one." I felt the shift in the room. The hushed whispers. The way Madison's smile froze, her eyes widening in shock. Noah's face paled, his fingers tightening around his glass. I sat gracefully, picked up the menu, and casually scanned it. Madison shot up from her chair, knocking over her drink. "Sophia." I lifted a hand, stopping her. "Don't let me interrupt. Enjoy your evening." A few guests looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. One of Noah's business partners cleared his throat. "Why don't you join us?" he offered, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. I smiled. "That's very kind, but I have work to do before next week's big announcement." Noah stiffened. His head snapped up. "What announcement?" I took a slow sip of my wine. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough." I knew what was coming next. Madison grabbed my arm, her grip tight, her breath shaky. "We need to talk," she hissed. I let her drag me toward the restroom, watching her carefully. She turned the second we stepped inside, her eyes wild. "What the hell are you doing here?" I raised an eyebrow. "Having dinner." "You can't just—" She stopped, exhaling shakily. "Sophia, I know you're angry, but—" "Angry?" I echoed. I tilted my head, watching her squirm. "Madison, I'm not angry." Her lips parted, her confidence faltering. "You're not." "No," I took a step forward, my voice soft. "I'm calculating." She flinched. "Tell me, Madison," I murmured, leaning in slightly. "How does it feel? Knowing you spent all that effort stealing a man who's about to lose everything." She blinked. What are you talking about? I smirked. Oh, sweetheart. I patted her shoulder and stepped past her. You'll see soon enough. As I walked back to my table, Noah was watching me.
Stiff.
Suspicious.
Good.
Let him be suspicious. Let them wonder. Because I wasn't just going to win. I was going to destroy them. When I walked out of La Bella Vita that night, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak. All I felt was focus. Madison and Noah had stolen my wedding, my trust, and my dignity. They wanted me to crawl away in humiliation, to disappear while they enjoyed their new life. But they had no idea that I was already setting the pieces in motion, that the real game had only just begun. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I took a cab to a quiet corner of the city, where a man named Ethan Miles was waiting for me at a small cafe. His message had been short and cryptic. We need to talk. I have information about Noah. I stepped inside, finding him at a back table, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He looked up as I approached, his gaze sharp but unreadable. You must be Sophia Carter, he said. And you must be Ethan. I slid into the seat across from him, folding my hands. Start talking. He didn't waste time. He slid a folder across the table, and as I flipped it open, I felt my stomach tighten. Bank records. Wire transfers. Financial statements. Noah's been stealing from his own company, Ethan said quietly. But here's the interesting part. The money isn't in his accounts. It's in accounts under your sister's name. I exhaled, scanning the numbers. Millions had been funneled from Bennett Capital into offshore accounts under the name Madison Carter Bennett. Ethan leaned forward. I've seen this before. He's setting her up. If this ever comes to light, he'll say she was behind it all, that she tricked him into transferring the money. He'll come out looking like a fool, but he won't go to prison. She will. I closed the folder slowly. Does Madison know? No, Ethan said. She thinks she won. But Noah's never been the kind of man to share his throne. A bitter smile touched my lips. He's not just a liar or a cheater. He's a criminal. Ethan nodded. And if you play your cards right, you can take him down completely. I looked at him carefully. Why are you helping me? His jaw tightened. Because Noah did this to my sister. Years ago. He convinced her to take out loans under her name, then left her with the debt when everything collapsed. She lost everything, and he walked away clean. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a pen. Then let's make sure he doesn't walk away this time. The next morning, I called for an emergency board meeting at Bennett Capital. With my new controlling shares, no one could stop me. Noah didn't know it yet, but he was walking into his own execution. By 3 p.m., I was seated at the long conference table inside Bennett Capital's headquarters. Around me, executives and shareholders whispered, wondering why I had called this meeting. Then at exactly 3:05, Noah walked in. His expression hardened when he saw me. What is this? I smiled. Take a seat. He hesitated, glancing around. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the uncertainty in his eyes. He was smart, he knew something was off. But he had no idea how bad it was about to get. When everyone settled, I nodded at the man beside me. Ethan stood, flipping open his laptop and connecting it to the large screen at the front of the room. For the past year, he began, millions of dollars have been siphoned from Bennett Capital into private accounts. On the surface, these accounts appear to belong to Madison Carter Bennett. A murmur ran through the room. Noah stiffened. His fingers curled against the table. That's ridiculous. Ethan continued as if he hadn't spoken. However, after deeper investigation, we found that every transaction was authorized by Noah Bennett. He clicked to another screen, displaying emails, signatures, transfer approvals, every piece of evidence needed to bury Noah alive. The boardroom fell into stunned silence. Noah's father, Richard Bennett, a founding member of the company, sat in horrified disbelief. Finally, Noah stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a setup, he snapped. I tilted my head. You mean like how you and Madison set me up? His face drained of color. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Tell me, Noah. If you weren't stealing, why did you make sure all the transactions led back to my sister? His jaw clenched, but he had no answer. Richard Bennett stood. His voice was cold, firm.
Noah.
Is this true? Noah stammered. I was consolidating funds. It was temporary. The other board members murmured, shifting uncomfortably. The tide was turning. I sat back, watching him crumble in real time. Harrington Enterprises is in a crisis, I said smoothly. The only way forward is new leadership. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Effective immediately, I'm proposing that Noah Bennett step down. His father was the first to nod. Then, one by one, the other members raised their hands. It was unanimous. Security moved in, stepping toward him. Noah lunged for me, his face twisted in rage. You think you've won? He hissed. You think this is over? I smiled.
Oh, Noah.
I didn't just win. I finished you. He was dragged out, his voice echoing down the hallway. I turned back to the board. Now, I said, adjusting my blazer. Let's discuss how we're going to fix the mess he left behind. After the meeting, I walked outside into the crisp evening air. I barely had time to breathe before I heard a soft voice behind me. Sophia. I turned. Madison stood there, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked small.
Lost.
She swallowed hard. You knew. You knew all along. I found out yesterday, I admitted. Her voice wavered. He never loved me, did he? I sighed. He loved what you could do for him. That's not the same thing. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't expect you to forgive me, but she looked down. I don't know what to do. I studied her carefully. Then I pulled a business card from my bag and handed it to her. Christine Moore, fraud lawyer. She's the best in the city, I said. Call her. Fix this. Madison looked at the card, then back at me. And us. I hesitated. Then I shook my head. We're not there yet. She nodded, wiping at her eyes. I understand. As I walked away, my phone buzzed with another text. Ethan. Now that the board's handled, let's talk about the gala. I have a feeling Noah's not done making a scene. I smirked. Oh, I was counting on it. The night of the Bennett Capital Gala arrived, and I knew this was the final act. This wasn't just an event. It was the stage where Noah's downfall would be complete. He thought he could still salvage his reputation, still convince people that he was a victim of circumstance. He was wrong. I walked into the venue with my head held high, wearing a sleek black dress that exuded power. Eyes followed me, whispers spreading through the crowd. People knew something had happened, but they weren't sure how much of the story was true. That was about to change. Across the room, I spotted Madison. She looked tense, her fingers clutching a champagne glass as her gaze darted around, searching for Noah. She was finally realizing that the man she had betrayed me for had set her up to take the fall. And then I saw him. Noah entered as if nothing had happened, dressed in his usual tailored suit, shaking hands, forcing smiles. But I could see it, the tension in his jaw, the flicker of desperation in his eyes. He was trying to hold on to power he no longer had. I let him think he still had a chance. Let him claw for hope. Because the higher you think you are, the harder the fall. At exactly 9 p.m., Ethan gave me the signal. The press had arrived. I stepped forward, clinking my glass lightly, drawing the room's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice smooth, carrying through the space. I'd like to make an announcement. The murmurs died down. Even Noah stopped talking, turning to face me. His smile faltered. I met his gaze. Time to end this. As many of you know, Bennett Capital has been undergoing a leadership transition. I began. Tonight, I want to thank those who have stood by us as we move forward into a new era of ethical business practices and transparency. The words hit him like a slap. He knew where this was going. I continued. However, before we celebrate, I feel it's important to shed light on some unfortunate discoveries we made over the past few months. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Noah's fingers tightened around his drink. Ethan stepped forward, holding up the evidence. Millions of dollars were siphoned from Bennett Capital into offshore accounts, he stated. At first glance, these accounts appear to belong to Madison Carter Bennett. Gasps erupted. Madison's face drained of color. But upon further investigation, Ethan continued, we found that every single transaction was approved and executed by Noah Bennett. A stunned silence filled the room. Then whispers, murmurs, disbelief. Noah stepped forward sharply. This is slander, he snapped. I raised a brow. Oh, then perhaps you can explain these signed documents. Ethan clicked to the next screen, emails, transaction records, signed approvals, all proving Noah's guilt. Noah froze. His father, Richard Bennett, pushed forward, his face twisted with rage.
Noah.
Is this true? Noah stammered, but his silence was answer enough. The police stepped into the room. Noah Bennett, one of the officers said, you're under arrest for fraud and embezzlement. The room erupted into gasps and flashing cameras. They pulled his hands behind his back, cuffing him. He turned toward me, pure hatred in his eyes. This isn't over, he hissed. I smiled. Oh, but it is. They dragged him away. I turned and found Madison standing there, frozen. Her voice shook. I didn't know. I studied her. For the first time, I saw someone lost, broken, used. I pulled a paper from my bag and handed it to her. A job, she whispered, confused. A chance, I corrected. To help victims of fraud. To fix what you can. Her eyes filled with tears. Why would you do this for me? I sighed. Because I'm done letting Noah destroy lives. Including yours. She nodded, clutching the paper like a lifeline. I turned and walked outside. The cool night air felt lighter. Noah was gone. Madison had a choice. And I was finally free. The next morning, I sat at the head of the Bennett Capital boardroom. The CEO nameplate gleamed in front of me. I smiled. Let's get to work. Because this wasn't just about revenge. This was about rebuilding. And I had already won. My sister tried to steal my wealthy husband. When she failed miserably, she forced my parents to skip my wedding and go on a trip. They switched off their phones, but 2 hours later, when they turned them back on, what they saw left them frozen in fear. Looking back now, I wonder if I should have seen it coming. Maybe the signs were always there, subtle but clear, hidden in the way my parents always treated my younger sister, Isla, differently from me. It wasn't outright cruelty towards me, but there was always this unspoken rule in our house. Isla came first. She was the delicate one, the one who needed protection, the one whose every mistake was brushed aside with excuses while I was expected to be responsible, reliable, and understanding. I didn't resent her at first. I loved my sister. I protected her, helped her whenever she needed me, and believed that was just how families worked. But I was naive. I thought that when it truly mattered, when the biggest moments of my life arrived, my parents would stand by me. I thought blood meant something. I was wrong. It all started when I met James. I was 23 when I fell in love with him. James was everything I had ever dreamed of, smart, ambitious, and kind. He worked hard, built his own success, and had the kind of confidence that made people admire him without him even trying. We met through mutual friends, and from the moment we started talking, there was something special between us. It wasn't just love, it was a deep understanding, a sense of home I had never felt before. When James proposed, I was overjoyed. I couldn't wait to share the news with my family, believing they would be as happy as I was. My parents congratulated me, but their reaction lacked the excitement I had expected. Isla, on the other hand, barely concealed her shock. She stared at the ring on my finger for a long moment before forcing a smile. Wow, she said, her voice strained. That's amazing, Eleanor. I should have noticed it then, the way she looked at James, not as my fiancé, but as someone she wanted. At the time, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just surprise. Maybe she was just emotional. I didn't know then that her obsession with James had only just begun. From that day forward, Isla's behavior changed. It started subtly. She would make little comments, disguised as jokes. "Are you sure you can handle a man like James? He seems so mature, and you're still so, a dreamer." I would laugh it off, thinking she was just teasing. Then, she started dressing differently whenever James was around, wearing clothes she normally wouldn't, fixing her hair in ways she never did before. She found excuses to join us whenever we had plans, always showing up uninvited, always making sure James noticed her. James never entertained her behavior. In fact, he barely acknowledged it, which I appreciated. But I knew my sister, and I knew she was testing the waters, seeing how far she could push. One evening, she cornered me in my room, fresh out of the shower, with a strange, determined look on her face. "You should break it off," she said bluntly. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. "Eleanor, listen to me. James isn't right for you. He's too successful, too serious. He needs someone who truly understands him." I stared at her, stunned. "And you think that person is you?" She didn't even hesitate before nodding. "I love him." It was ridiculous. It was insane. But looking into her eyes, I realized she truly believed it. My own sister wanted my fiancé, and she was willing to say it out loud. I walked past her, shaking my head. "You've lost your mind, Isla." But she wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, she grew bolder. She found excuses to be alone with James, asking him invasive questions about our relationship, our future, even hinting that I was immature and not ready for marriage. She went so far as to try and touch him in subtle ways, grabbing his arm, standing too close. It was sickening. James, to his credit, was always firm with her. He would brush off her advances, sometimes outright ignoring her. One evening, he took my hands in his and said, "Eleanor, I only love you. I see what she's doing, but it doesn't matter because I only have eyes for you." I wanted to believe that was the end of it. But Isla wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat. Just a few days before the wedding, I overheard my parents whispering with Isla in the living room. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. "Are you sure?" My mother's voice was hesitant. "Yes, Mom. You don't understand. I can't watch her take everything from me," Isla whined. "It's not fair." We can't just not go to her wedding," my father muttered. "Why not?" Isla's voice turned sharp. "If you really love me, you'll prove it. Plan a trip. Leave on the wedding day. Show her that she's not more important than me." I felt the air leave my lungs. My own sister, convincing our parents to abandon me on my wedding day. I wanted to believe they wouldn't listen. I wanted to believe they would tell her she was being selfish, that they would scold her, remind her that this was my wedding, my happiness. But instead, I heard my mother sigh. "Fine," she murmured. "We'll book something last minute." That moment, standing in the shadows, listening to my family betray me, was the moment everything changed. I had always known they favored Isla, but I never thought they would go this far. I turned away before they could see me, my hands trembling. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I walked to my room, closed the door, and sat in silence.
This was my family.
These were the people who raised me, and on the most important day of my life, they were going to turn their backs on me. The worst part? I knew they wouldn't even feel guilty. I didn't sleep the night before my wedding. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation I had overheard between my parents and Isla. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, they would change their minds. That in the morning, they would realize how cruel it was to abandon me on my most important day. But deep down, I knew better. When the morning light streamed through my window, I forced myself out of bed, my heart heavy. My wedding dress hung in the corner of my room, waiting for me, but I felt no excitement, only a growing sense of emptiness. I reached for my phone, hesitating before checking my messages. There it was. A single text from my mother. "Eleanor, we've decided to take a trip. It's last minute, but we need this break. We won't be able to attend the wedding. Have a great day." I read it over and over, my fingers tightening around the phone. No apology. No regret. Just a casual message, as if they were canceling dinner plans and not my wedding. As if I meant nothing. My chest ached with betrayal, but I refused to cry. I wouldn't let them ruin this for me. James arrived at the venue early, as did his parents. They greeted me warmly, his mother holding my hands and smiling. "You look beautiful, Eleanor," she said gently. "But why do you seem so sad?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a smile. "My family isn't coming." James stiffened beside me. His father frowned. "Why not?" I could barely bring myself to say it. They decided to take a trip instead. Silence filled the room. I expected James's family to be shocked, maybe even question if I had done something wrong. But they didn't. Instead, James's mother wrapped her arms around me. "Then we're your family now," she whispered. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back my emotions. I didn't want to cry, but their kindness almost undid me. James placed a hand on my back, leaning down to whisper, "Eleanor, we don't need them. This is our day. Let's not let them ruin it." And so, I put on my dress, fixed my makeup, and walked down the aisle with James's father by my side instead of my own. The ceremony was beautiful. The guests cheered, and despite everything, I found happiness in James's love and the warmth of his family. But even as I smiled for the cameras, even as I danced and laughed, I couldn't shake the image of my parents and Isla. On some vacation, their phones turned off, celebrating their triumph over me. The days following the wedding were strange. I felt both relief and a deep ache in my chest. I had expected at least a call from my parents after it was over, but nothing came. No text, no apology, nothing. Isla, of course, remained silent as well. James was patient with me, never pushing me to talk about it. Instead, he focused on our new life together. We moved into our home in Chicago, and I threw myself into work. The pain didn't fade overnight, but as time passed, it became easier to accept. I learned to stop expecting love from people who never gave it freely. Years went by, and my life flourished. James built his company from the ground up, turning it into one of the most successful tech firms in the city. I built my own career, balancing work and family. We had 2 children, our son, Ethan, and our daughter, Lily. They were the light of our lives, and every moment spent with them reminded me of what real love looked like. I never reached out to my parents or Isla. If they had ever regretted what they did, they never showed it. I assumed they were still wrapped up in their own world, indulging Isla's selfishness as they always had. Then, 15 years later, they appeared on my doorstep. I had just finished making dinner when the doorbell rang. James and the kids were in the living room, laughing about something when I walked to the door. The moment I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. There they were, my mother, my father, and Isla. They looked different. Older, of course, but not just in the way that time ages people. My parents had always been well kept, living comfortably, but now they looked weary, almost desperate. And Isla, she no longer had the same smug confidence she once carried. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes were plain, and the arrogance that had always been in her eyes was replaced with something else. Something hollow. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then my mother smiled weakly. "Eleanor, it's been so long." I didn't move. I didn't invite them in. I didn't know how to react to the people who had abandoned me all those years ago now suddenly standing at my door as if nothing had happened. My father cleared his throat. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms.
About what?
There was an awkward silence before Isla finally spoke. "I need a job." I blinked, stunned by the audacity of her words. Of all the things she could have said, of all the possible reasons they could have come here, this was it? I looked past her at my parents. "And you?" My mother sighed. "We've been struggling. Your father and I lost most of our savings, and Isla, well, her marriage didn't work out. She needs help finding work, and we thought maybe James could offer her something at his company." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "So, let me get this straight. You abandoned me on my wedding day, ignored me for 15 years, and now that you've lost everything, you expect my husband to give Isla a job." My mother flinched. "Eleanor, we were wrong back then, but you have a good life now. Can't you let the past go?"
The past.
As if it were something small, something forgettable. I glanced back at James, who was now standing behind me, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I knew what he was thinking. I looked back at my family, the people who had hurt me so deeply, now standing before me, expecting my help. For the first time in years, I smiled at them.
No.
I stepped back and shut the door in their faces. I stood there for a moment, my hands still resting on the doorknob, my heart pounding in my chest. The audacity of it all. After 15 years of silence, 15 years of pretending I didn't exist, they thought they could just show up at my door, ask for a favor, and be welcomed back into my life as if nothing had happened. I turned to see James watching me. He didn't say anything at first, just studying my face, waiting for my reaction. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Can you believe this?" I muttered, shaking my head. James smirked, his voice calm as always. "Oh, I believe it. I expected it sooner, honestly." I frowned. "You think they were always going to come back?" He nodded. "People like them? They always do. Not because they regret what they did, not because they miss you, but because they need something." I sighed, rubbing my temples. I just can't believe Isla. After everything, she still thinks she can take from me. First, she tried to take you, then my wedding, my family's support, and now she wants you to give her a job. James stepped closer, resting a hand on my back. "But she won't get anything from you, Eleanor. Because you're not that person anymore. You don't owe them anything." I nodded, trying to let his words sink in, but there was a lingering anger inside me, a frustration that wouldn't settle. I had thought I had moved on. I had built a good life, a happy family. But seeing them again, hearing their voices, watching them stand on my doorstep with their entitled expressions, it reminded me of all the pain they had caused. And I wasn't done with them yet. The next morning, I wasn't surprised when they tried again. The doorbell rang, and this time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door and saw the same 3 faces, but this time, they looked more desperate. "Eleanor, please," my mother started, her voice softer, more pleading. "Just let us talk." I crossed my arms.
"Talk.
About what?" "About how you chose a vacation over my wedding. About how you abandoned me without a second thought. Or maybe about how you now expect me to save you after all these years." My father sighed, shifting uncomfortably. "We made a mistake, Eleanor. We shouldn't have done that. But we were caught in a difficult position. Isla needed us." I scoffed. "And I didn't." Isla finally spoke, her tone sharp. "You're acting like you were some victim. You got your perfect life, didn't you? You married a rich man, had kids, lived happily ever after. Meanwhile, I had nothing." I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Nothing? You had everything handed to you. Our parents sacrificed for you, spoiled you, prioritized you over me in every possible way. And you still lost it all." I tilted my head. "I wonder why that is." Isla's face turned red. "I just made some mistakes." "Mistakes?" I repeated. "Is that what you call it? What happened to your rich husband, Isla?" She flinched, and I knew I had hit a nerve. I had done some research before opening the door last night. Her husband had been wealthy, but their marriage had ended in a nasty divorce. He had cited irreconcilable differences, but I knew what that meant. Isla had done what she always did. Manipulated, lied, pushed too far. And for once, someone had seen through her and left her with nothing. She didn't answer, so I continued. "And you, Mom? Dad? Where did all the money go?" My father cleared his throat. "We helped Isla when she needed us. But we didn't expect things to turn out this way." I let out a slow breath. "So, let me get this straight. You drained your savings on Isla. She got divorced and lost everything. And now, you expect me and James to fix it?" My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "We're still your parents, Eleanor." I felt a sharp pang in my chest at those words. Parents. The same parents who had abandoned me. The same parents who had let Isla push them around like puppets. Now, when they had nowhere else to turn, they suddenly remembered they had another daughter. I shook my head.
"No."
"You stopped being my parents the day you chose her over me." Isla's lips pressed into a thin line. You think you're better than us because you're rich now. I met her gaze steadily. No, Isla. I think I'm better than you because I worked for what I have. I built this life without stepping on anyone, without using manipulation or deceit. And I'm certainly not about to throw away everything I built for people who never once supported me. Isla opened her mouth, then closed it. She wasn't used to being denied, wasn't used to hearing the truth spoken so bluntly. My father sighed heavily. So that's it? You're just going to turn us away? I nodded. That's exactly what I'm going to do. James stepped beside me then, his presence strong and unwavering. This conversation is over. Eleanor has made her decision, and I support her completely. Please don't come back. My mother's face twisted in pain. Please, Eleanor, don't do this. I met her gaze, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing for her. No longing for approval, no sadness, no regret. Just clarity. You did this, Mom, I said quietly. Not me. And with that, I shut the door in their faces for the second time. I stood at the door for a few moments after shutting it, listening to the silence on the other side. I imagined my parents exchanging helpless looks, Isla fuming, maybe even trying to come up with another way to manipulate me into giving them what they wanted. But I knew they had nothing left. I had taken away their last hope, their last lifeline. And I didn't feel bad about it. Not even a little. James walked up beside me, resting a hand on my lower back. Are you okay? He asked softly. I turned to him, studying the man who had been by my side through it all. The man my sister had tried to steal, the man my parents had dismissed as nothing more than a ticket to a better life for Isla. But he had always been more than that to me. He had been my anchor, my greatest love, the family I had chosen. I'm fine, I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it. We walked back to the living room, where Ethan and Lily sat on the couch, their eyes filled with curiosity. They had been watching from the corner, though I had told them not to. Lily, only 10, had a furrow in her little brow. Mom, who were those people? I hesitated, unsure of how to explain it to them in a way they would understand. But before I could answer, Ethan, 14 and far too perceptive for his age, spoke. It was your family, wasn't it? I looked at my son, the boy who had inherited James's sharp mind and quiet strength. Yes, I admitted. It was them. Lily tilted her head. Why did you close the door on them? I sighed, sitting down beside them. Because sometimes, Lily, people who are supposed to love you don't always treat you right. And when they don't, you have to learn when to walk away. She frowned, thinking hard. But they're your family. I smiled sadly. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you, who loves you, who is there when you need them. James's parents are more my family than the people you just saw outside. Ethan nodded, understanding faster than his sister. So, they only came back because they needed something? I nodded. Exactly. James sat down beside me, draping an arm over my shoulders. And your mom made the right choice. Lily thought for a moment, then nodded as if she had made peace with the answer. Ethan simply looked relieved, as if he had worried I might let them back in. But I wouldn't. That was the last time I saw them. They didn't return after that. Maybe they realized there was nothing left to take from me. Maybe Isla's pride wouldn't allow her to beg again. Either way, they disappeared just as quickly as they had reappeared. A few months later, I heard from an old family acquaintance that my parents had moved to a smaller apartment, struggling to make ends meet. They had spent their retirement savings trying to keep Isla afloat, and now that she had nothing, they had nothing. And Isla? She bounced from one short-lived job to another, unable to keep steady employment. Her name had become a joke in some social circles. People whispered about how she had gone from trying to marry into wealth to begging for scraps. There was a time when hearing that would have made me feel vindicated would have given me some kind of twisted satisfaction. But now I only felt indifferent. They were reaping what they had sown. I had my own life to live. I had a husband who loved me, children who brought me endless joy, a career I had built with my own hands. I didn't need revenge. Their downfall had been inevitable, and I had learned that true revenge wasn't about watching them suffer. It was about living my life without them. Years passed, and the bitterness faded, replaced by something else. Peace. The kind of peace I had never had growing up in that house, where I was always second to Isla. The kind of peace that came from knowing I had broken free from the cycle, that I had built a family where no one would ever feel unwanted or unloved. One day, when Ethan was getting ready for college, he sat me down and asked, "Mom, do you ever think about them?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. "Not really," I admitted. "Sometimes, maybe, but not in the way you think. I don't miss them. I don't wish things had been different. I just wonder sometimes if they ever regretted it." Ethan smirked. "I doubt it." I chuckled. "Me too." Then he looked at me seriously. "You're happy though, right?" I reached out, brushing his hair back like I used to when he was little. More than I ever thought I could be. And I was. For the first time in my life, I was completely free. On our 5th wedding anniversary, my husband handed me a beautifully wrapped gift in front of our guests. Inside were divorce papers. He introduced his young mistress, laughing as if he had won. Everyone gasped, waiting for my reaction. But instead of breaking down, I simply smiled and handed him my own gift. The moment he opened it, his face drained of color. He never saw it coming. And that was just the beginning of his downfall. If someone had told me 5 years ago that my marriage would end in the most humiliating yet satisfying way possible, I wouldn't have believed them. Back then, I thought I had found the love of my life, my forever. Ethan was everything I never knew I wanted: charming, ambitious, and attentive. We met at a client meeting when I was working on a real estate deal. He was a financial analyst, handling the numbers for a property investment firm. Our first conversation wasn't extraordinary, just polite small talk about work and the city, but something about him intrigued me. He was confident but not arrogant, serious yet warm. We exchanged numbers, and before I knew it, we were going out for coffee, then dinner, then spending weekends together. It all moved so fast. Within months, he proposed, romantic, on a rooftop restaurant, the city lights glowing behind us. I remember feeling a rush of excitement, butterflies in my stomach. I said yes, without hesitation. Maybe I should have paused, thought about it more, but I was caught up in the idea of us, of the future we could have. We married just 4 months later, in a small but elegant ceremony, surrounded by friends and family. The first year was beautiful. We traveled, explored new restaurants, and spent hours talking about our dreams. We spoke about buying a bigger house, maybe moving to a different city, and having kids one day. He told me he wanted 2, a boy and a girl. I pictured our life together, growing old, supporting each other through everything. I was happy. But happiness can be deceptive. The changes started small. Ethan became more focused on work, staying late at the office, always tired when he came home. I didn't question it at first. I understood ambition. I had it too. But then his criticisms began. First about little things. How I folded laundry, how I cooked a meal, how I organized our closet. Then about bigger things. How I worked too much, how I should cut down my hours, how I wasn't like his friends' wives, women who stayed at home, raising kids, making sure their husbands had hot meals ready every night. At first, I laughed it off. "You married an independent woman, Ethan," I'd say. "You knew what you were getting into." But the conversations didn't stop. He started pressuring me to take on less work, to prioritize home life over my career. I loved my job. I had worked hard to build my reputation as a top real estate agent. I wasn't about to throw that away just because he wanted a wife who played the role of a quiet homemaker. Our fights became more frequent. Some days, he was apologetic, claiming he just wanted what was best for us. Other days, he was distant, as if he didn't even care anymore. Then came the nights when he didn't come home until late, claiming work had kept him busy. I wasn't stupid. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the way he avoided eye contact, the way his phone was always face down on the table, the way he suddenly became overly protective of his personal space. I started noticing subtle things, his cologne smelling different, faint traces of perfume that weren't mine, the way he started dressing sharper on random weekdays, almost as if he was trying to impress someone else. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wasn't going to scream and accuse without proof. If there was one thing I had learned from my job, it was that evidence wins battles. So I waited. One evening, while Ethan was in the shower, I took a chance and glanced at his phone. I knew his passcode. He had given it to me long ago when trust wasn't an issue. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, but when I saw his messages, my heart stopped. I can't wait to see you tonight. She has no idea. It's actually hilarious. You're everything I've been missing. I scrolled further. Hotel reservations. Dinner receipts from places he'd never taken me. Pictures. That was the night I realized my marriage was over. But instead of confronting him, instead of breaking down, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim. I started preparing, building my own escape plan in silence. I met with a lawyer, gathered every piece of evidence I could. I made sure that when the time came, I wouldn't just walk away. I'd take everything he thought was his. And then came our 5th wedding anniversary. Ethan suggested we have a small celebration with close friends and family. He seemed oddly excited about it, more engaged than he had been in months. Something felt off, but I played along, pretending to be the same devoted wife I had always been. I smiled, laughed, acted oblivious. I made sure he suspected nothing. The day arrived. Our home was filled with guests, champagne glasses clinking, people offering their congratulations. Ethan was at his charming best, playing the role of the perfect husband. Then, just before dinner, he stood up, cleared his throat, and said he had a special gift for me. A beautifully wrapped box was placed in front of me. "Go on," he said, grinning. "Open it." Everyone watched as I unwrapped the box, my fingers steady, my heart hammering in my chest. The moment I lifted the lid, I saw them, divorce papers.
Signed.
Ready. Gasps filled the room. People exchanged looks of shock and confusion. I looked up at Ethan.
He was smiling, smirking.
"I've found someone younger," he announced, his voice filled with arrogance. "And I deserve to be happy." My eyes flicked to the side. Standing there in a sleek red dress was Lily. 25 years old, blonde, beautiful, a fitness instructor. The woman he had been seeing behind my back. She was smirking, standing by his side like she had won some kind of prize. I could feel the eyes of the guests on me. Some whispering, some frozen in shock. But I didn't react the way Ethan expected. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply smiled, pushed the box aside, and reached into my bag. "Oh, Ethan," I said sweetly, "that's so thoughtful. But now it's your turn." I pulled out an envelope and placed it in front of him. "Open it." He frowned but reached for it, tearing it open as Lily leaned in, curious. And then his face turned white. His hands shook. His eyes darted over the papers, scanning every word. For the first time that night, he looked truly afraid. Lily's smile faded. "What is it?" she asked, leaning closer. But Ethan couldn't speak. His lips parted, but no words came out. I crossed my arms, tilting my head slightly. He thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming next. Silence filled the room. Ethan's hands trembled as he gripped the papers, his once confident smirk now completely wiped from his face. His eyes darted across the document, scanning every line, every signature, as if he were desperately trying to find a way out. But there wasn't one. Lily, still standing by his side, leaned in impatient. "What is it?" she whispered, her smile faltering. I folded my arms, tilting my head slightly. "Go ahead, Ethan. Tell everyone what my gift is." He swallowed hard, his face pale. His lips parted, but no words came out. That was the moment I saw it, the shift, the realization that he had lost. That all his arrogance, his betrayal, his twisted little plan to humiliate me in front of our friends and family had backfired spectacularly. "Someone want to tell us what's going on?" My best friend, Claire, broke the silence, her voice laced with suspicion. Others murmured, confused, waiting for Ethan to explain. But he was frozen.
"Fine.
I'd do it for him." I took a slow step forward, my heels clicking against the floor. Then, with a calm smile, I spoke. This, ladies and gentlemen, is proof that I now own this house, both of our bank accounts and Ethan's investment portfolio. Everything in his name, transferred to me legally. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lily's eyes widened. What? I let out a light laugh. Oh, there's more. I continued, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. This also includes an official legal claim for a financial settlement of $450,000, which, thanks to Texas's infidelity laws, Ethan is now required to pay. And if he refuses, well, let's just say the court won't be kind to him. Ethan finally found his voice, but it was shaky, weak. This isn't possible, he muttered, shaking his head. You can't. Oh, but I did. I cut in smoothly. See, while you were busy sneaking around with your mistress, I was busy securing my future. I spoke with the best divorce lawyer in the city. I collected evidence of your affair, text messages, photos, credit card statements. Everything I needed to ensure you lose everything you took for granted. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for only him and Lily to hear. Did you really think I didn't know? I whispered. Did you think you were smart enough to fool me? Lily took a step back, her expression twisting with panic. You're joking, she said, her voice laced with desperation. Tell me this is a joke. But Ethan couldn't speak. He looked like he was going to be sick. I turned back to our guests, flashing them the same polite smile I had given Ethan minutes ago. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a celebration to continue. I walked over to the bar, pouring myself a glass of champagne. The room was still in stunned silence, but one by one, people started to whisper. A few of Ethan's co-workers shook their heads, disappointed. My friends? They were beaming. Claire mouthed, "Holy sh*T," at me, barely able to contain her grin. Ethan was still standing in place, as if his entire world had just collapsed around him.
Lily?
She was already reaching for her purse, looking like she was ready to flee. That's when I delivered the final blow. Oh, and Lily? I called out. She stiffened but didn't turn around. Just in case you had any big plans with Ethan's money, you might want to rethink that. I sipped my champagne, savoring the moment. Because he doesn't have any left. She turned then, her face twisting in horror. What the hell are you talking about? I shrugged. Well, you weren't exactly discreet. I found out about you months ago. So I made sure that every account Ethan controlled was legally moved into my name. He doesn't have access to a single cent. Lily's expression darkened. You're lying. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and held it up for her to see. $0 in Ethan's personal accounts. Every asset, every property, every investment?
Mine.
She turned to Ethan, her face red with fury. Tell me this isn't real, she hissed. Ethan finally moved, but only to sink into a chair, burying his face in his hands. That told her everything she needed to know. Oh my God, she whispered. You're broke? Ethan didn't respond. Lily let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head.
Wow.
Just wow. And to think I actually thought you were an upgrade. And just like that, she grabbed her purse and walked right out the door. I could have ended it there, but I wanted one last moment. One final conversation. So, as the guests slowly dispersed, I approached Ethan. He didn't even look up. You brought this on yourself, I said quietly. I gave you everything. I trusted you. And in return, you tried to destroy me. He lifted his head slightly, his eyes empty. You were never supposed to fight back. I smiled. That's where you messed up, Ethan. You thought I was weak. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw him that night. But it wasn't the last time he came crawling back. I thought that would be the end of it. That after losing everything, Ethan would crawl away, ashamed and defeated. But I was wrong. A man like him doesn't disappear quietly. For the first few weeks after the party, I didn't hear from him at all. It was like he had vanished. I settled into my new life, moving into a luxury condo in Seattle, a place I had secretly purchased long before the divorce was finalized. My real estate business was thriving, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. There were no more forced smiles, no more pretending to be someone I wasn't just to make my husband feel secure. Then one evening, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I hesitated but answered out of curiosity. "Hey, it's me." Ethan's voice came through, hesitant, almost fragile. I didn't say a word. I let the silence stretch, waiting for him to dig his own grave. He exhaled. "I just wanted to talk." I laughed, actually laughed. "Talk? Ethan, you served me divorce papers as an anniversary gift. In front of our family and friends. What could you possibly have to say now?" A long pause. Then, in a much softer voice, he said, "I made a mistake." I rolled my eyes. Which one? Cheating, lying, or assuming I wouldn't fight back? "You know I never wanted things to end like this," he said, ignoring my sarcasm. I was stupid. I let things get out of control. Out of control? I scoffed. "Ethan, you planned my public humiliation. You were so confident you'd walk away with everything. And now that you've lost, you want to talk." "I don't have anyone else," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper.
Good.
But I wasn't about to let him think he could manipulate me with self-pity. "Oh, what happened to Lily?" I asked mockingly. "She ran off once she realized you had nothing to offer?" I heard his breath hitch. That was my answer. "She left me," he muttered. "Said she wasn't interested in a broke man. Moved on to someone else within a week." "That's tough," I said, pretending to sound sympathetic. "Really tragic." "Sophia, please," he said, his tone shifting. "I know I screwed up, but we were together for 5 years. That has to mean something." I took a slow sip of my wine, letting his words hang in the air before I answered. "You're right, Ethan. It does mean something." I paused, then added, "It means I wasted 5 years of my life on a man who never deserved me." Silence. Then, in a desperate attempt, he said, "Can we meet? Just once. Please. I just want to see you." I smirked, imagining the broken man sitting on the other end of the call.
"No, Ethan."
"You saw me the last time you needed to, when I ruined your life." And with that, I hung up. I assumed that would be the last of him. I was wrong again. Days later, he showed up at my new condo. I had just finished a meeting when the front desk called. "Miss Carter, there's a man here asking for you. He says his name is Ethan." I sighed. "Tell him to leave." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I just want to talk. Please." "I'm outside." I looked out my window, and sure enough, there he was, standing near the entrance, looking nothing like the polished man I once knew. His suit was wrinkled, his hair a mess, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He looked pathetic. I considered ignoring him, but then I thought, why not? Let's see just how low he's fallen. So, I went downstairs. The moment he saw me, his eyes lit up with hope. "Sophia, thank you for coming." I crossed my arms. "I didn't come for you. I came to see just how desperate you really are." He flinched, but quickly recovered. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he began. "But I lost everything. My job, my money, my reputation. People at work, they found out about everything. I had no choice but to resign." I raised an eyebrow. "And that's supposed to make me feel bad for you?" "I don't want pity," he said quickly. I just want a second chance." I burst out laughing. "You have to be kidding me. I've changed," he insisted. "I see now how much I took you for granted. I should have appreciated you more. I was blinded by my own ego. But I know now that you're the only person who ever truly cared about me." I tilted my head. "Tell me something, Ethan. If I hadn't taken everything from you, if Lily hadn't left you, would you still be here?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't have an answer. I stepped closer, looking him dead in the eye. "You don't regret what you did. You regret losing." "Sophia, please," he whispered, reaching for my hand. I stepped back.
No.
"You don't get to touch me. You don't get to act like the victim. You're here because you have nowhere else to go. And I am not your safety net. His shoulders slumped, his entire body deflating. So, that's it. I gave him a small smile.
Oh no, Ethan.
That's not it. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. His eyes widened, almost hopeful. Is this? I tossed it at him. That's a restraining order. Stay away from me. His mouth fell open. You. Goodbye, Ethan, I said, turning on my heel and walking back inside. I didn't look back. That was the last time I saw him. Later, I found out through mutual acquaintances that Ethan had moved to a small apartment in Houston, struggling to make ends meet. Word spread that he tried to get another job in finance, but no firm wanted to hire a man with a reputation like his. His once pristine image was shattered. As for me, I thrived. I expanded my real estate business, traveled, and finally lived the life I had always deserved. And for the first time in years, I was truly happy. But the best part? The fact that Ethan would wake up every single day knowing that the woman he tried to destroy was the one who completely ruined him. And honestly, that was the best anniversary gift I could have ever received. It's funny how life works. 5 years ago, I stood at the altar, looking at Ethan with love in my eyes, believing I had found my forever. Now, I barely remembered what that love had felt like. What once seemed like an unbreakable bond had turned into nothing more than a lesson. After everything, I never heard from Ethan again. Not directly, at least. Occasionally, a friend or acquaintance would mention him in passing, telling me how he was struggling, how no one in the industry would hire him after the scandal. Apparently, he had tried to start his own financial consulting business, but it never took off. His past followed him everywhere. The very same reputation he once cared so much about had now become his greatest curse. I never wasted my time thinking about him. I had my own life to live, my own success to focus on. My real estate business thrived, expanding into multiple cities, including Los Angeles and Miami. I started traveling more, seeing the places I had always dreamed of, but never had the freedom to explore. I spent my nights with friends, laughing, drinking, and celebrating the life I built for myself, a life that had nothing to do with Ethan. But the biggest surprise? The one that truly made me believe in karma? It happened almost a year after our divorce. One morning, I was having brunch at a beautiful cafe in San Diego, sipping my coffee and enjoying the fresh ocean breeze. Life had been peaceful, exactly how I wanted it. Then, just as I was about to leave, I heard a voice I hadn't expected to hear ever again. Sophia? I turned around and there he was.
Ethan.
But he wasn't the man I used to know. His suit was wrinkled, his hair slightly unkempt, and there was a tiredness in his eyes that I had never seen before. He looked small. Smaller than I had ever imagined him being. For a moment, I just stared at him, debating whether I even wanted to acknowledge his existence. But then curiosity got the best of me. I tilted my head and gave him the smallest of smirks.
Ethan. Wow.
What a surprise. His eyes searched mine, like he was trying to find something familiar in me, something that would remind him of the woman he used to control. But I wasn't her anymore. You look different, he said, his voice unsure. I chuckled. I'd hope so. I've been living my best life. I took a sip of my coffee, watching his expression shift. Regret. Jealousy.
Defeat.
I heard about you, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. You're doing really well. I am, I said simply. A pause. Then softly, I miss you. That made me laugh. Actually laugh. Loud enough that people at nearby tables glanced over. That's cute, Ethan. Really? But you don't miss me. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. You miss the life you had when you were with me. You miss the power, the comfort, the success. And now that you've lost it all, you think you can just waltz back in? I shook my head, smiling. It doesn't work that way. He exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. I know I screwed up, he muttered. But I held up a hand. Let me stop you right there. I don't need your apologies. I don't need anything from you. He looked down, his fingers tapping against the table, struggling to find the right words. but it didn't matter. There was nothing left to say. I stood up, grabbing my purse. Goodbye, Ethan. I hope you figure things out for yourself. And then, just for fun, I leaned in slightly and whispered, "Oh, and by the way, you're right. I do look different. I look happy." With that, I turned and walked away, feeling lighter than ever. That was the last time I ever saw him. I never needed revenge to feel whole, but it was satisfying to know that he had destroyed his own life. And me? I had built mine back up stronger than ever. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't ruining someone else's life. It's making yours so good that they can't stand to watch you succeed. And that's exactly what I did. On my first wedding anniversary, my husband blindsided me with divorce papers, sold my dream apartment behind my back, and ran off to another state with his mistress. He thought I was weak. He thought I would crumble. But I stayed silent, smiling, because in 7 days, I was about to ruin his entire life. I still remember the night before my first wedding anniversary as if it were yesterday. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing a romantic dinner, carefully setting the table with Liam's favorite dishes, arranging fresh roses, and selecting the perfect bottle of wine. I was excited, eager to celebrate our first year together, thinking about how we had built a life side by side. I had even bought him an expensive watch, a symbol of my love and the time I believed we had ahead of us. But when I walked into the apartment that evening, my world collapsed in an instant. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The eerie, suffocating kind, the kind that tells you something is wrong before you even understand why. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, scanning the room. The apartment felt emptier somehow. A sense of unease crawled over me. Then, my eyes landed on a single white envelope on the kitchen counter. My name was written on the front in Liam's familiar handwriting, but something about it felt off. A sinking feeling settled in my chest as I approached it, my hands trembling slightly as I picked it up. My breath hitched as I slid my finger under the seal, dreading what I was about to read. I unfolded the letter and read the first sentence. Then, my knees nearly gave out beneath me. "Sophia, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm filing for divorce. I've sold the apartment, and you'll need to find somewhere else to live. I'm moving to Miami with Madison. Don't try to reach me. It's over." For a moment, my brain refused to process the words. It didn't make sense. I read it again, slower this time, as if I had somehow misinterpreted it. But the meaning didn't change. Liam had left me. Not only had he walked away on our anniversary, but he had also sold our home. Our apartment. The place we had spent years working for, decorating, filling with memories. And he had done it for her. Madison. The name felt like poison in my mouth. I had suspected something for months. The late nights, the unexplained trips, the distant look in his eyes when I asked about work. But never, not in my worst nightmares, had I imagined he would do something this cruel. The letter slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. A lump rose in my throat, but I refused to cry. My entire body trembled as an unfamiliar feeling took over me.
Rage. How dare he?
How dare he walk away like this? Without a conversation, without a warning, without even the decency to look me in the eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw everything in the apartment. The plates, the framed pictures, the carefully chosen decor, every single thing that now felt like a lie. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath. Crying wouldn't fix this. Rage wouldn't fix this. But revenge would. I clenched my jaw, my mind shifting into sharp focus. Liam thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted me. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. I wasn't going to be a victim. My hands were steady as I reached for my phone. There was only one person I knew could help me burn his perfect new life to the ground. Emma. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice groggy from sleep. "Sophia? It's late. What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. Liam left.
Silence.
Then, Emma's voice sharpened. "What do you mean he left?"
He's gone.
"He moved to Miami with Madison. And I swallowed, the words thick in my throat. He sold the apartment. There was a long pause. Then, Emma's voice turned cold. He did what? He sold our home. He didn't even tell me, just left a letter and disappeared. My nails dug into my palm. I don't even know where to start. A sound of papers rustling came from the other end of the line. Wait a minute, Emma muttered. Sophia, that's not possible. I frowned. What do you mean? Emma exhaled sharply. The deed is in your name. My breath caught. What? Remember when we refinanced the loan last year? You insisted on having the deed transferred solely to your name to secure a lower interest rate. Liam signed off on it without reading the paperwork. I blinked, my pulse racing. I had completely forgotten. Are you saying that he had no legal right to sell it? Which means, Emma let the words sink in. He just committed fraud. A slow smile curled my lips. Liam thought he had won, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. How bad is it for him? I asked, my voice steadier now, controlled. Oh, it's bad. Emma chuckled darkly. If he took any money from the buyer, he could be facing a serious lawsuit. Maybe even jail. The satisfaction that ran through me was almost dangerous. Then let's make sure he pays, I said softly. That's exactly what we're going to do, Emma agreed. I'll start the legal process first thing in the morning. But Sophia, yeah. Emma hesitated. Are you okay? I looked around the apartment, my apartment, the home Liam had tried to steal from me. And for the first time since I read that letter, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I let out a slow breath. I will be. And I meant it. The next morning, I woke up with a new kind of determination. Gone was the woman who had been blindsided by heartbreak the night before. In her place was someone who refused to be defeated. Liam thought he had taken everything from me, but he had no idea that he had left behind the one thing that mattered most: power. As soon as I got out of bed, I dialed Emma. She picked up on the first ring, her voice crisp and alert. I've already started looking into everything, she said before I even spoke. And you're not going to believe what I found. I poured myself a cup of coffee, bracing myself. Go on. Emma exhaled. Liam didn't just sell the apartment illegally. He already spent the deposit money. The buyer wired him a hefty sum, expecting the sale to go through. But since the apartment was never his to sell, the sale is void. I smirked. So, what happens next? He's in a world of trouble, Sophia, Emma said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. He's looking at both civil and criminal charges. Fraud, misrepresentation, and if the buyer pushes for it, he could go to jail. I let those words settle in.
Jail.
I never thought I'd wish something like that on someone I once loved, but after what Liam had done, he deserved everything that was coming. Emma continued, I've already reached out to the buyer and explained the situation. They're furious. They've agreed to file charges against him if he doesn't return the money immediately. I leaned back against the counter, tapping my fingers, which he probably can't do, considering he's already started his new life with Madison in Miami. Exactly, Emma confirmed. And that means he's about to have a very, very bad week. I smiled into my coffee cup.
Good.
But that was only the beginning. Later that day, I met up with Rachel, my best friend, who had been itching to get involved. As a journalist, she had a way of uncovering the truth, especially the kind of truth that destroyed reputations. I slid into the booth at our usual cafe, watching as she stirred her tea with an eager gleam in her eyes. I did some digging, she said casually. And, Sophia, you're going to love this. I arched an eyebrow. Tell me. Liam didn't just cheat on you and commit fraud, she said, lowering her voice slightly. He's in debt. Massive debt. Credit cards maxed out, loans unpaid. He was banking on the money from the apartment sale to keep him afloat. I wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed, that was different. Rachel leaned in, her lips curling into a smirk. And guess what? Madison has no idea. I couldn't help but laugh. Of course she didn't. Madison had fallen for the illusion of Liam, the successful real estate agent, the man with charm and confidence. But in reality, he was a fraud in every sense of the word. Rachel tilted her head. So, what do you want to do with this information? I exhaled slowly, my mind already working through possibilities. Let's make sure the world knows exactly who Liam is. Rachel's eyes sparkled. I was hoping you'd say that. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of anger or sadness, but because I was planning. I wanted to hit Liam where it hurt the most. His money, his reputation, his ego. Emma was handling the legal side. Rachel was digging into his financial mess. But there was one more thing I needed to do. I had to confront him. 2 days later, I got my chance. I tracked his location through an old shared banking app we had forgotten to unlink. It showed a transaction from a luxury hotel in Miami. It didn't take much effort to figure out where he was staying. So, I booked a flight. The moment I stepped into the hotel lobby, I felt the weight of the moment. The Sophia from a week ago would have crumbled at the thought of seeing him again. But the woman walking through those doors now, she was ready. I spotted him near the bar, laughing with Madison, his arm draped over her shoulder like he hadn't just wrecked my life days ago. My rage simmered beneath the surface, but I kept my expression calm. I walked straight up to them, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Liam's laughter died the second he saw me. His eyes widened. Sophia? Madison looked between us, her perfect smile faltering. Who is this? I crossed my arms, tilting my head. Oh, you didn't tell her, Liam? Madison frowned. Tell me what? I pulled my phone from my bag and held it up. On the screen was a screenshot of the fraud complaint Emma had filed. That your boyfriend here stole money from a real estate transaction and is now facing legal action. Madison's face drained of color.
What?
Liam stiffened. That's not. Oh, it's real. I cut him off. And it's only the beginning. By next week, he'll be making headlines. Madison turned to Liam, anger flashing in her eyes. You told me you were rich. Liam's jaw clenched. Madison, let's go somewhere and talk. Don't bother, I said smoothly. Because once his bank accounts get frozen and he starts drowning in lawsuits, he won't have much left for you. Madison jerked away from him like he was toxic. You're disgusting, she spat before storming off. Liam turned back to me, his expression dark. You think this is funny? I smiled. I think it's justice. He took a step forward, lowering his voice. You can't do this, Sophia. I met his gaze, unwavering. I already did. Then I turned and walked away. Liam called my name, but I didn't look back. Because this time I was the one leaving. As I walked out of that hotel lobby, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel regret. I felt something better. A rush of satisfaction spread through me, knowing that for once, Liam was the one losing, not me. For so long, I had believed his lies. I had allowed him to make me feel less than small, insignificant. He had convinced me that I was lucky to have him, that he was the one in control.
But now?
He was the one watching everything he built crumble around him. And the best part? I wasn't even done yet. I took the next flight back to Los Angeles, sitting by the window with a quiet sense of calm washing over me. As the city lights of Miami faded behind me, I thought about Liam. I imagined his face when he realized Madison was gone. When his phone started ringing nonstop with angry clients, legal threats, and reporters asking for comments on the fraud case. By the time I landed, Rachel had already done her part. The second I turned on my phone, the headline was everywhere. Los Angeles real estate agent accused of fraud allegedly sells wife's apartment without her consent. A slow smile spread across my lips as I scrolled through the article. Rachel had exposed everything. The illegal sale, the stolen money, the fraud. She had even included details about his financial collapse, the unpaid loans, the desperate attempts to escape responsibility. It was all over the news. I pictured Liam waking up, seeing his face plastered across headlines, knowing that his entire career was over. Clients dropping him, business contacts cutting him off, people whispering about him in hushed tones. His perfect little Miami fantasy?
Gone.
Just as I was about to call Rachel to thank her, my phone rang.
Emma.
You're not going to believe this, she said as soon as I answered, excitement in her voice. I raised an eyebrow. And Liam just called me. I sat up straighter.
What?
He's panicking, she said, laughing. He's trying to negotiate. Says he's willing to talk things through if we drop the legal action. I smirked. Oh, now he wants to talk. Let me guess, I said. He realized he actually needs money to start a new life, and now he's trying to wiggle his way out of trouble? Exactly, Emma confirmed. But here's the best part. He doesn't have the money to return to the buyer. He already spent most of it, and the rest is locked in his frozen accounts. So that means… I prompted, my pulse picking up in anticipation. It means the fraud charges are sticking. Emma's voice was filled with satisfaction. He's officially in deep legal trouble. And if he can't pay back the money, he's looking at jail time. I let out a breath, feeling something inside me settle. Liam had destroyed my trust, humiliated me, tried to erase me from my own life. He thought he could just walk away and start over.
But now?
He had nowhere left to run. Let him panic, I said calmly. We're not dropping anything. Emma chuckled. That's exactly what I told him. After we hung up, I sat by my apartment window, watching the city skyline. It was strange how light I felt. I had spent so much time carrying the weight of my failed marriage, the betrayal, the heartbreak.
But now?
It wasn't my burden anymore. Liam could deal with the consequences. I was free. The next day, my phone rang again, from an unknown number. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello.
A pause.
Then, a voice I hadn't expected. Madison. I smirked. Didn't expect to hear from you. Her voice was tight-clipped. Yeah, well, I didn't expect to get scammed by my boyfriend either. I almost laughed. Oh, the irony. So, what do you want? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated for a moment before asking. I just wanted to know, how much trouble is he really in? I leaned back in my chair, enjoying this far more than I should. Oh, it's bad. Financially? He's ruined. Legally?
He's looking at jail time.
And career-wise?
He's done.
No one's going to work with him after this. There was silence on her end. Then she muttered, Jesus. I hummed. Guess that rich lifestyle he promised you wasn't so real, huh? She let out a bitter laugh.
Yeah.
You could say that. For a moment, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered. She had known Liam was married when she got involved with him. She had willingly helped him break apart my life. So, I didn't offer her sympathy. Instead, I said, you might want to cut ties with him while you still can. Because once he's behind bars, he's got nothing left to offer you. She exhaled sharply.
Yeah.
I think I already knew that. And with that, she hung up. I stared at my phone for a second, then shook my head. Liam really had lost everything. No apartment. No money. No career. And now, no Madison. Poetic justice. That evening, Rachel came over with a bottle of wine, flopping onto my couch with a satisfied grin. Well, she said, pouring us both a glass. Guess who was spotted arguing with his lawyer in Miami today? I raised an eyebrow. Liam? She nodded. He looked like a mess. Rumor is he's desperate for a way out. But surprise, surprise, he doesn't have one. I took a sip of my wine, relishing every word. So, Rachel asked, tilting her head, how does it feel knowing your ex-husband is about to lose everything? I thought about it for a moment before answering. It feels peaceful. And it did. Not because I had won, but because I had taken back my life. Liam had tried to ruin me, but all he had done was set me free. Rachel raised her glass. To karma. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling lighter than I had in years. Liam had thought he had won. But in the end, I was the one standing. A week later, I got the call I had been waiting for. Emma's voice was filled with satisfaction as she said, It's over, Sophia. Liam's been arrested. I closed my eyes, letting those words sink in. Arrested. I had imagined this moment over and over, but nothing could compare to the satisfaction of hearing it aloud. He was caught trying to leave Miami, Emma continued. The buyer officially filed charges, and with the fraud complaint we submitted, There was no way out. He was taken into custody this morning. I leaned back on my couch, a slow smile spreading across my face. How long is he looking at? Emma sighed. At least a couple of years if the prosecution pushes for it. And with his financial history, he won't be able to pay his way out of this one. I let out a breath, feeling the last bit of weight lift off my chest. Liam was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Are you going to see him before he goes in? Emma asked. I thought about it,
About what I would even say to him.
but the truth was, I had nothing left to say. Liam wasn't worth another second of my time. No, I said firmly. I'm done. And I meant it. Over the next few days, everything fell into place. Liam's career was officially destroyed. His former clients wanted nothing to do with him. His reputation was gone. The bank repossessed his assets, leaving him penniless. And Madison? She disappeared the second he was arrested. I found out later that she had posted a dramatic video on social media about being deceived and not knowing the real Liam. The comments were brutal, calling her out for knowingly getting involved with a married man. She had lost, too. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My apartment, which Liam had tried to steal from me, was finally mine again. I redecorated, getting rid of every trace of him. His ugly furniture, his tacky sports memorabilia, even the expensive espresso machine he had insisted on. All of it was gone. For the first time in a long time, my home felt like my own. One evening, Rachel came over with a bottle of wine, flopping onto my couch. So, she said with a smirk, how does it feel knowing your ex-husband is sitting in a jail cell right now? I thought about it for a second before answering. It feels peaceful. And it did. Not because I had won, but because I had taken back my life. Liam had tried to ruin me, but all he had done was set me free. Rachel raised her glass. To fresh starts. I clinked my glass against hers, smiling. To never letting a man like Liam fool me again. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. It was from Liam. Sophia.
Please.
I screwed up. I know that. I need your help. I stared at the message, waiting for the anger to come. But all I felt was pity. Liam, the man who once thought he was untouchable, was now begging me. I deleted the message without replying. He wasn't my problem anymore. A month later, my divorce was finalized. It was a clean break. No drawn-out court battles, no fighting over assets. Liam had nothing left to fight for. I signed the papers with a smile, knowing that this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of my new life. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free. My own sister destroyed my life. She poisoned our grandfather, framed me, and stole our $150 million inheritance. I was sent to prison for a crime I didn't commit. But when I got out, she never saw it coming. I never imagined that my life, carefully built with discipline and hard work, could crumble so quickly. But when your own family turns against you, when those closest to you betray you for money, you realize how fragile everything truly is. My name is Nancy Reynolds. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent my life earning everything I have. While my family has always lived under the shadow of wealth, dependent on my grandfather's fortune, I chose to take a different path. I worked my way through college, landed a job in finance, and climbed my way up to become a senior finance executive in Seattle. I never relied on anyone, never expected handouts, and most importantly, I never lived a life of illusion. Unlike me, my older sister, Sophia, was the opposite. She was once a TV news anchor, but when that career faded, she reinvented herself as a socialite in Los Angeles. To the world, she was elegant, charming, always perfectly dressed, always attending exclusive parties. But I knew the truth. Her entire lifestyle was paid for by our grandfather, William Reynolds. Without his money, she was nothing. Our parents, Daniel and Margaret, were no different. They had settled in Los Angeles, living a comfortable life in a luxury estate, but not because of their own success. Everything, from their home to their cars, even their extravagant vacations, was funded by my grandfather. They acted as if they had built their own wealth, But in reality, they were nothing more than well-dressed dependents, pretending to be something they weren't. And then there was grandfather William Reynolds, the man who built everything. He had started as a struggling real estate developer and turned himself into one of the most successful businessmen in the country. His fortune was vast, his properties stretched across multiple states, and yet, despite his wealth, he always valued one thing above all: independence. Earn your own way, he used to tell me, because the moment you rely on others, they own you. I had always lived by those words. But my sister, my parents, they never listened. That's why I knew Thanksgiving was always a game. Every year, my family gathered at the Monarch Hotel, a 5-star resort in Los Angeles, for a lavish, expensive celebration, all paid for by grandfather. It was a tradition, but for my parents and sister, it was more than that. It was an opportunity to impress, to pretend they were something greater than they really were. I arrived at the hotel on Thanksgiving morning, exhausted from my flight, but mentally prepared. I always hated these gatherings, but I attended for grandfather. He was the only one in my family who truly understood me, the only one who ever encouraged me to be independent. I checked in, placed my suitcase in the suite, and freshened up before heading downstairs. As I walked through the grand lobby, I spotted my parents sitting by the bar, talking in hushed voices. My mother's face lit up when she saw me, but my father barely looked at me. He had always favored Sophia, and that had never changed. Then, Sophia appeared. She was dressed in designer heels, carrying an expensive handbag, and wearing a diamond necklace that I knew she hadn't paid for herself. She walked toward me with a smug expression, as if she had already won some unspoken competition. "Nancy," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "You made it." "Of course I did," I replied. "Where's grandfather?" Sophia's smile faltered. "He's resting," she said after a pause. A strange feeling crept into my chest. Something was off. As dinner approached, I started to worry. Grandfather always arrived early to these events, always eager to see me, always full of life. But as the night stretched on, he never showed up. Then, just as the servers were preparing dessert, a hotel staff member approached the table and whispered something to my father. My mother gasped. My father's face turned pale. And then I knew. Something terrible had happened. The next thing I heard was a single sentence that sent a chill through my bones. "Your grandfather has passed away." The room spun. My heart pounded. The words didn't make sense. "He was fine yesterday," I whispered. I spoke to him, but no one met my gaze. Sophia dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, but there were no real tears. My mother, usually dramatic about the smallest inconvenience, was eerily composed. My father sighed and rubbed his temple, as if this were nothing more than an unfortunate event to be managed. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. Grandfather was gone, and yet no one seemed truly shocked. The funeral was held 2 days later, a grand affair with important guests and carefully arranged tributes. But through all the eulogies, the condolences, and the empty words, something gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. And then came the will reading. I sat in the law office, still numb from grief, waiting to hear my grandfather's final wishes. His lawyer, a man who had worked with him for decades, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. As per Mr. William Reynolds' final will, the majority of his estate, his businesses, his financial assets, and his properties will be inherited by... He looked up directly at me. Nancy Reynolds. A stunned silence filled the room. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. My father turned red, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. And then there was Sophia. Her expression, for the first time, was stripped of all pretense. She was furious. I was meant to inherit everything. Not her. Not my parents.
Me.
Before I could even process the weight of those words, Sophia spoke, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. This doesn't make sense," she snapped. "Grandfather never said anything about this." But the lawyer simply folded his hands and continued. "The will was updated a month ago. Mr. Reynolds believed that Nancy was the only one in the family who shared his values, the only one capable of running his empire responsibly. Sophia's hands clenched into fists. My mother reached for her pearls as if clutching them would make reality change. My father stared at me with pure resentment. And then I realized something. My grandfather had always been healthy. His mind had always been sharp. His death had come out of nowhere. And now, after his passing, Sophia was the one acting as if something had been stolen from her. That's when I knew. Grandfather's death was no accident. The moment I walked out of that office, I knew I had to find the truth. My grandfather had always been a strong, sharp-minded man. He was careful with his health, cautious with his business, and above all, he never trusted blindly. There was no reason for him to suddenly collapse and die, unless someone had helped make it happen. And there was only one person who had everything to gain from his death. Sophia. I didn't say anything at first. I let them think I was still in shock, still trying to process the news. But inside, I was burning. As we left the law office, Sophia walked beside me, her arms crossed, her mouth set in a tight line. I could feel her watching me, waiting for a reaction. "This changes nothing," she finally said, her voice low and controlled. I stopped walking and turned to face her. "It changes everything." Her lips curled into a cold smile. "You think you're in control now, Nancy? That this money, this power, actually belongs to you?" She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." I held my ground. "Neither do you." I didn't need to hear anything else. I already knew she was guilty. The problem was proving it. Over the next few days, I started digging. I made calls to my grandfather's doctors, looking for anything suspicious. The medical report listed natural causes, but that meant nothing. If someone had tampered with his medication or slipped something into his food, it wouldn't necessarily show up without deeper testing. And that's when I found my first crack in the story. My grandfather's private nurse, someone who had worked for him for years, had suddenly quit 2 days before he died. That wasn't a coincidence. I tracked her down, called her, and asked to meet. At first, she refused.
Said she didn't want to get involved.
"Please," I told her, my voice barely steady. "I just want to know what really happened." She hesitated, then whispered, "He wasn't supposed to die that night." My blood ran cold. "I can't say more," she added. "But check his medication. And be careful. People like your sister, they don't like loose ends." I hung up, my hands shaking. I didn't know what scared me more, the confirmation that my grandfather had been murdered, or the fact that whoever did it was still watching. That night, I went to my grandfather's estate, searching through his things, looking for anything that felt out of place. And then, in the bottom drawer of his desk, I found it, a bottle of heart medication that he had never taken before. I knew my grandfather's prescriptions. He had always been meticulous about his health. This bottle wasn't his. Someone had replaced his real medication with something else. I stared at the bottle, my breath coming fast. This was the proof I needed. If I could get it tested, I could find out what was inside. I could expose Sophia for what she was. But I never got the chance. The next morning, I woke up to loud banging on my hotel room door. Before I could even process what was happening, the police were inside, surrounding me, pulling me out of bed. "Nancy Reynolds, you're under arrest for financial fraud and embezzlement." Everything blurred. My heart pounded, so hard I thought I might pass out. "What? No, this is a mistake." I tried to resist, tried to explain, but the officers weren't listening. And then I saw her, Sophia, standing just outside the hotel room, her arms crossed, watching as the police handcuffed me. She smiled. She had set me up. The next few days were a nightmare. I was dragged into an interrogation room, forced to listen as the investigators listed off evidence of my so-called crimes, forged financial documents, missing money from my grandfather's estate, accounts in my name that I had never seen before. It was all fake. I knew it. But Sophia had planned this too well. And my parents? They didn't defend me. They didn't even hesitate. When they were called in for questioning, my father sat down, folded his hands, and said coldly, "We always knew Nancy had a selfish streak." My mother nodded. Sophia has always been the responsible one. It makes sense that grandfather would trust her with everything. I wanted to scream,
To cry.
but I refused to give them that satisfaction. The trial was swift. The judge denied bail. I was convicted. And just like that, I lost everything.
My job.
My reputation. My freedom. The day they took me to the maximum security prison, I sat in the transport van, staring out the window, watching my life disappear behind me. But as I felt the cold weight of those prison walls close around me, something inside me hardened. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried me. But they underestimated me. I had lost the battle. But the war? The war was just beginning. Prison strips you of everything. Your identity, your dignity, your sense of time. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that prison doesn't break everyone. Some of us find a way to survive. And in my case, I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to fight back. The first few weeks were the hardest. The moment I walked through those gates, I could feel the weight of the stairs. Some of the other inmates saw me as fresh meat, someone easy to break. But they didn't know me. They didn't know that I had already been broken the day my own family turned on me. And when you've already lost everything, there's nothing left to fear. I kept my head down, observed, and waited. I needed a way out, not just out of prison, but out of this nightmare Sophia had created for me. I had been set up, betrayed, and buried alive, but I wasn't going to stay buried. It started with small conversations. In a place like this, you learn quickly that power doesn't just come from strength, it comes from information. I listened, made connections, and slowly began piecing together a way to clear my name. And that's how I met Detective Mark Collins. Collins had been investigating my grandfather's death before I was even arrested. He had suspected something wasn't right about how suddenly William Reynolds had passed, but before he could dig deeper, the case was shut down.
I knew why.
Sophia had made sure of it. One afternoon, Collins came to see me. He sat across the metal table, flipping through a folder, his face unreadable. Then he slid something toward me, a photo of the prescription bottle I had found in my grandfather's office. "You are onto something," he said. I stared at him, my pulse racing. "What do you mean?" "We had the pills tested. They contained traces of digoxin poisoning. In small doses, it causes heart failure. Looks like someone had been slipping it into your grandfather's medication over time." I gripped the edge of the table. There it was. The proof. But Collins wasn't finished. I also found something else. He reached into his bag and pulled out bank records, Sophia's bank records. There was a large transfer made a week before William Reynolds' death, $500,000 deposited into an offshore account under the name of your grandfather's private nurse. My breath caught. Sophia had paid her off. "She disappeared right after your arrest," Collins continued. "But we've tracked her to Mexico. If I can get her to testify, we can open the case again." I exhaled slowly, my mind spinning. This was it. This was my way back. Collins looked at me seriously. "I believe you, Nancy. But I need time. Stay out of trouble." Trouble found me first. That night, someone slipped a note under my cell door. No name, no handwriting. Just 3 words. "Stop digging. Now." I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly who had sent it. Sophia may have gotten me locked up, but she wasn't done with me yet. She was watching, waiting, making sure I never made it out of here. She had underestimated me. Over the next few months, I worked with Collins and my lawyer, Adam Foster, gathering every single piece of evidence we could find. We found witnesses, a housekeeper who had seen Sophia tampering with my grandfather's drinks, an accountant who noticed money missing from his estate before his death. And finally, Collins did the impossible. He tracked down the nurse. And she was ready to talk. With all the evidence in place, Foster filed for an appeal. The hearing was scheduled, but Sophia had one last move to make. 2 nights before my court date, I was attacked in my cell. It happened fast. A woman I didn't know cornered me, shoving me hard against the wall. "You don't know when to quit," she hissed, pulling a sharpened piece of metal from her sleeve. Sophia says you should stay put. I acted before she could strike. I twisted, slamming my elbow into her ribs, knocking the weapon from her hands. Guards rushed in, and within seconds, she was dragged away, screaming. I sat on the floor, my chest heaving. Sophia had just made her last mistake. 2 days later, I was standing in court again, but this time, I wasn't the one on trial. Foster laid out everything: the poison, the bribes, the missing money, the testimony from the nurse. Collins presented the forensic evidence, and when it was Sophia's turn to speak, she cracked. She tried to deny it, tried to twist the truth, to paint herself as the victim. But the evidence was overwhelming. Everyone in that courtroom saw her for what she was. And then, the judge gave his ruling. Nancy Reynolds, all charges against you are dropped. You are free to go. I had won. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Sophia had stolen everything from me. My name, my life, my freedom. Now it was time to take everything from her. Walking out of that courtroom, feeling the cold air hit my skin, I should have felt free. But I didn't.
Not yet.
Freedom wasn't just about walking out of prison, it was about taking back what was stolen. And Sophia had stolen everything. My name, my life, my future. Now it was my turn. The reporters were everywhere, cameras flashing, microphones being shoved in my face. Nancy, how do you feel about your release? What will you do now? Do you plan to press charges against your sister? I ignored them. I had only one destination in mind, the estate my grandfather left me, the home Sophia had stolen. When I arrived, I wasn't surprised to find her there, sitting in the grand living room, swirling a glass of wine like she still owned the place. She didn't look surprised to see me either. Well, she sighed, setting down her glass. I was wondering when you'd show up. I took a slow step forward, my hands in my pockets. This house isn't yours, Sophia. She smirked, but there was something off about it. She was scared. Legally, no, she admitted. But does that really matter? You think you can just step back into the life I built? She laughed, but it was forced. People like me always land on their feet. I stared at her. Is that what you think? That you're going to get away with this? She crossed her arms. I already have. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. A second later, a newscaster's voice filled the room. Breaking news. A financial investigation into Sophia Reynolds has uncovered massive fraud and theft from the William Reynolds estate. Prosecutors are now preparing formal charges, with potential sentences ranging up to 25 years in prison. Sophia's face drained of color. I kept going. Oh, and it gets better. Turns out grandfather left a clause in his will. Anyone convicted of a felony forfeits their inheritance. I smiled, tilting my head. That means everything. The house, the money, the investments. Gone. She shot up from her seat. You're lying. I stepped forward. Check the news. I made sure every reporter in the city got the files. Sophia grabbed her phone, scrolling with shaking fingers. And then, as the reality sank in, her entire body sagged. You ruined me, she whispered. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head.
No, Sophia.
You ruined yourself. Her eyes darted around the room, desperate. Nancy, please. You don't understand what it's like. I had no choice. I laughed, cold and sharp. No choice. You killed grandfather. You framed me. You had me thrown in prison like I was trash. I stepped even closer, lowering my voice. You tried to have me killed in there. She flinched. You had a choice, I continued. And you chose greed. You chose yourself. Tears welled up in her eyes.
Please, Nancy.
Don't let them take me to prison. I can fix this. But I was already walking away. Behind me, I heard her sobbing, begging, her voice breaking apart. I never looked back. The next morning, Sophia was arrested outside that same house, her hands cuffed behind her back as reporters swarmed her. I watched from my office in Seattle, sipping my coffee. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My parents weren't spared either. Without grandfather's money, their luxurious life crumbled overnight. They lost their home, their credit was destroyed, and soon they were forced to move into a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles.
I didn't hear from them after that.
Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. I focused on rebuilding my career, and thanks to my reputation being restored, I received a job offer that was even better than the one I lost. I was back on my feet, stronger than ever. One evening, I received a letter from prison. Sophia. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sentence. I see it now. You were always stronger than me. I folded the letter and set it aside. She was right. The ultimate betrayal had led to silent execution. Not by my hands, but by karma, justice, and the truth. And that was enough. My stepsister announced she was 4 months pregnant with my fiancé's child, right in the middle of my wedding. My family stood and clapped for them. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked away in silence. 3 months later, I returned with nothing but a smile and handed them a box. Their happiness turned into tears because inside the box was... If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here, telling this story, I would have laughed and brushed it off. My life was on track, better than ever, actually. I had just turned 31, was living in downtown Seattle, working as a marketing executive at a firm that appreciated my ideas, and I was engaged to a man I thought I'd spend forever with. Daniel Myers. Smart, soft-spoken, supportive. We met at a tech conference in San Francisco. He was a senior software developer giving a talk on AI ethics. I asked a question during the Q&A, and he found me afterward to continue the discussion. It started with coffee, turned into dinners, long phone calls, and before I knew it, he was in my world like he had always belonged. I still remember the night he proposed. We were on a rooftop overlooking the city skyline, wrapped in a blanket, sipping wine. I want you, Alyssa. All of you forever, he said, sliding the ring onto my finger. I believed him. I truly did. I said yes through tears and laughter, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. Everything moved quickly after that. We set a date for June and decided on a lakeside wedding. I handled most of the planning. It's just who I am. Organized, detail-focused. Daniel helped when he could, though I started noticing he seemed distracted. I chalked it up to work stress. He had just transitioned to a new project and was pulling long hours.
Or so he said.
But looking back, the signs were there. Then there was my family. My relationship with them was always complicated. My mom, Cynthia, remarried when I was 7. Her new husband, Barry, was decent in a basic sense. Never cruel, but never really warm. He had a daughter from a previous relationship, Kayla, who was 5 years younger than me. From the start, it was obvious who the favorite was. Kayla could do no wrong. She could crash cars, drop out of school, burn through their savings to chase an influencer dream, and they'd still call her spirited. Meanwhile, I was the serious one. The one who followed rules, paid my own bills, built my life from scratch. I didn't live for their approval anymore, but that didn't mean it didn't sting. My biological dad, Dr. Victor Grant, lived down in Portland. A retired neurologist with a quiet life and a golden retriever named Max. We talked occasionally. Birthday calls. Holiday texts. He never fought for custody, never came to school plays. But I couldn't hate him. Maybe because, in his quiet way, he always let me know he cared. Maybe because, deep down, I always hoped he'd show up when I really needed him. 3 weeks before the wedding, things started to shift. Daniel became more distant, less affectionate. He'd go quiet during dinner, avoid eye contact when we discussed vows. Just tired, he kept saying. It's the workload. I believed him. Because I wanted to. Kayla, on the other hand, was suddenly around a lot more. She'd never taken much interest in my life before, but now she was showing up to bridal fittings, chiming in with venue advice, even texting Daniel funny memes and random check-ins. I noticed. Of course, I noticed. But I thought no, I hoped I was being paranoid. The night before the wedding, we hosted a small rehearsal dinner at the venue. My mom beamed as if everything was perfect. Barry gave a toast about new beginnings. Daniel smiled politely, but barely touched his food. Kayla was glowing, overly chatty, loud, sipping mocktails with a strange smugness in her eyes. Later, when I pulled Daniel aside, I asked, "Are you okay?" He gave me a tired smile. "Just nerves. Everything's going to be fine." I kissed his cheek and whispered, "I can't wait to marry you." The next day, I woke up early. My best friend helped me into my dress. My makeup was flawless. The sun was shining, the lake sparkled. The guests had all arrived. I stood behind the ceremony doors, bouquet in hand, heart pounding, not with fear, but joy. Then the doors opened. I stepped forward, music playing, all eyes on me, and then chaos. Before I reached the altar, a voice cut through the music. "Stop. Stop the wedding." I froze. Everyone turned. It was Kayla, standing at the back, her face flushed, breathing heavy. "I'm pregnant," she shouted, "with Daniel's baby." For a moment, no one moved. The world around me stood still. Then voices, gasps, Daniel calling her name. I looked at him. "Tell me she's lying." He wouldn't meet my eyes. Silence. The pain hit me like a truck. "You cheated on me with her?" I whispered. He tried to say something, but the words didn't matter. "Not anymore." Guests murmured. Cameras clicked. My mother ran to Kayla. Barry followed, looking concerned. And then Cynthia turned to me, her voice steady. "Alyssa, maybe we can fix this. Daniel's willing to take responsibility. Don't throw everything away." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Responsibility? He betrayed me with my sister. "She's not your sister," Cynthia said coldly. "You're not even acting like family." That was the moment I realized I was utterly alone. I left, ripped off my veil, tore through the crowd, and didn't look back. That night, I drove to Portland. I hadn't called ahead. I just showed up at my dad's door with mascara-streaked cheeks and shaking hands. He opened the door, saw my face, and pulled me into a hug. "Come in," he said softly. "Whatever happened, we'll figure it out." And I broke. Not just cried, I broke. Because I thought I had lost everything. But what I didn't know then was that I had just begun. The first few days in Portland felt like a blur. I barely spoke, barely ate. My dad didn't push. He made me tea, left books by the bedside, and simply existed in the background like a calm anchor. I stayed in the guest room, the same one I used as a teenager during summer visits. Funny how a place could hold so many versions of you. On the fourth night, he made pasta and we finally talked. I told him everything about Daniel, Kayla, the wedding, my mother's reaction. Every word felt heavier than the last. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he just said, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You didn't deserve any of that." I nodded, swallowing back the ache. "I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're still you," he said. "They didn't take that from you. You're just hurt. But hurt heals." He was right. And after 2 weeks of hiding, something in me stirred. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was anger. But I was done being broken. I needed to rebuild. That's when Dad mentioned Lincoln and Marks. A friend of his from med school, now married to the founder, had mentioned they were hiring. A digital branding firm, fast-growing, competitive. He said, "You're smart, talented. Go show them." I hesitated. "You think they'd even look at me?" "I'd hire you in a heartbeat," he smiled. "Let them see what I see." I sent in my resume the next day, still half-doubting myself. But a week later, I got the call. The interview went smoothly, clean, sharp questions about market trends, client strategy. I felt alive again talking about the work I loved. Within days, they offered me the position. I said yes. The office was downtown, all glass and chrome, with a view of the river. My team was a mix of smart, focused people. I kept my head down, worked hard, avoided personal conversations. They respected that. Within a month, I was leading 2 major projects. I started to feel like myself again. Until the morning Daniel walked in. I had just finished my coffee when I heard the voice I hadn't expected to hear again. "Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Myers. I'll be joining as the new app development lead." My stomach dropped. I looked up and locked eyes with him. He froze for half a second, clearly just as surprised. I wanted to scream or disappear, but I didn't. I nodded, said, "Welcome to the team," and went back to my screen. That day, I worked in a fog. I couldn't believe it. Out of all companies in Seattle, he had to land at mine? Had the universe not humiliated me enough? In the days that followed, I avoided him. I kept things professional, brief, distant. I wasn't going to let him see me unravel again. But of course, he couldn't leave it alone. One afternoon, in the break room, he cornered me. "Alyssa, can we talk?" he asked. "There's nothing to talk about," I replied flatly.
Please.
"Just hear me out." I stood still, arms crossed.
Fine.
"Talk." He looked tired, nervous. "I didn't mean to hurt you. What happened, it wasn't planned. Kayla was vulnerable. We both made a mistake." I scoffed. "You cheated on your fiancée with her stepsister. That's not a mistake. That's a decision."
He sighed.
"She lost the baby, Alyssa. She was devastated. And now she can't have kids again. That stress, that day, it broke her. And you." "Stop."
My voice was ice.
"Are you seriously blaming me for that? You ran. You left her in pieces." I felt something inside me snap. "You're unbelievable. You lied. You betrayed me. And now you're trying to make me feel guilty." He didn't reply, just stared at me, guilt and bitterness written all over his face. I walked away, shaking, fuming. That night, I told my dad everything. Over dinner, in low, tight words. He listened, his fork frozen midair. When I finished, he leaned back and took a long breath. "There's something I need to tell you."
What?
He looked almost ashamed. "Kayla didn't have a miscarriage." I blinked. "What?" "She came to see me after the wedding. Told me she'd had an abortion. That the baby wasn't Daniel's." I sat there stunned. She said it was someone she met at a bar. A fling. She didn't want the baby, so she ended it. I didn't say anything then, because I thought it wasn't my place. But now she's blaming me for something that never happened. I finished for him. He nodded, regret in his eyes. I felt sick. All this time, I had carried guilt. Thought maybe, just maybe, I'd pushed her too hard.
But it was all a lie.
She manipulated everyone. Lied to Daniel. Lied to our family. Lied to me. I stood up from the table. "I need air." Outside, I paced the porch, heart pounding. Betrayal layered on betrayal. But this time, I wasn't going to walk away. She wanted drama? I'd give her the truth. And I'd make sure the world heard it. I just needed proof. Something she couldn't deny. And that's when I thought of hiring someone. Someone who could get close to Kayla without raising suspicion. Someone who could catch her being her true self. Because if I'd learned anything by now, it was this. People always expose themselves when they think no one's watching. And Kayla? She loved an audience. The next morning, I began looking for someone who could do the job quietly, without drama, without traces. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted undeniable truth. It didn't take long to find her. Jasmine Cole, private investigator, mid-40s, ex-journalist, now specialized in personal surveillance and truth extraction. Her online reviews read like spy novels, and her reputation was solid. I sent a brief message, and within a few hours, we met at a quiet diner in Portland. She sat across from me in jeans and a leather jacket, notebook in hand. "So, Alyssa," she said, her tone calm but curious. "What are we after?" I explained everything. Daniel, Kayla, the fake miscarriage, the abortion, the lies, and how Kayla was still playing the victim card while destroying what little was left of my reputation. Jasmine didn't flinch. She just listened. "She still lives in Seattle?" she asked. I nodded. "Same condo. Still spends most weekends partying downtown. She's not hard to find." "And how close are you now?" "Not at all. Haven't spoken since the wedding."
Perfect, she said.
"That means she won't see me coming." I asked her how she planned to approach it. "She likes attention, right? Instagram, TikTok, the influencer scene? I'll blend in." I'll meet her at a bar she frequents, strike up a conversation. The rest is just patience. People like that always say too much when they feel safe. Her confidence gave me a strange kind of comfort. I nodded. Whatever it takes. I just want the truth. On record. Jasmine smiled. Then let's get it. She left for Seattle the next morning. The following days were slow torture. I checked my phone every few minutes, jumped at every buzz. I couldn't focus at work. Daniel kept his distance, though I could feel him watching me sometimes. I didn't acknowledge it. He wasn't even worth a glance anymore. On the fifth night, Jasmine finally called. I got it, she said simply. I froze. Got what? Everything. I met her that evening in a quiet parking lot near the waterfront. She handed me a flash drive and a pair of earbuds. She went on a rant. Wine and ego make people careless. Just listen. I plugged it in and pressed play. Kayla's voice came through, slurred and laughing. I told everyone it was Daniel's.
Please.
That man's so gullible. He actually cried. Thought he'd be a dad. But it wasn't even his, it was that bartender from Capitol Hill.
Ugh.
I wasn't about to raise his baby. You know. There was more. Racist slurs. Mocking laughter. She went on about how everyone believed her because she played the victim better than Alyssa ever could. She bragged about ruining my life, how pathetic I looked in my wedding dress, and how she owned the family now. I took out the earbuds slowly. My chest burned, not just from rage, but from clarity. There it was. Proof. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. That enough? More than enough, I said. Want me to keep going?
No.
This is the final blow. I thanked her, paid her, and went home. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared out the window at the city lights and planned. I waited 3 more days. I needed it to be perfect. I invited both Kayla and Daniel to a rooftop cafe downtown, somewhere neutral and public. No surprises. Just the truth. Kayla walked in first, wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer jacket, like she was attending a press conference. Daniel showed up minutes later, tense, guarded. They sat across from me at the table. Kayla gave a little fake smile. So? You finally ready to get over it? I leaned back and placed a plain envelope in the center of the table. What's this? Daniel asked. Proof, I said. Go ahead. Kayla reached for it, but I stopped her. Actually, I think Daniel should hear it first. He took out the flash drive and popped it into his phone. I watched his expression change. Curiosity, confusion, and then disbelief. As Kayla's voice filled the air, her smirk faded. She leaned in, eyes wide. You recorded me? No, I said calmly. Someone else did. You made it easy. Daniel stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. You lied.
You lied to me.
You lied about everything. Kayla stammered. Daniel, He didn't wait. He walked away, phone still in hand, shoulders stiff. Kayla turned to me, her face red with fury. You think this makes you smart? You'll regret this. I stared at her without blinking. Maybe. But I'm done being your victim. She stormed off, drawing eyes from nearby tables. I didn't care. I sat there for a while, watching the sunset, feeling the weight lift off my chest. The next morning, I uploaded the audio to an anonymous file and sent it to Lincoln and Mark's HR. By lunchtime, Daniel was pulled into a meeting. Later that week, he was quietly removed from the development lead role and reassigned to a side project with no client contact. I heard through whispers that HR had launched an investigation. As for Kayla, the fallout was swift. Brands she partnered with cut ties. Her influencer deals vanished overnight. Screenshots of her slurs from the recordings started circulating. Her carefully curated online persona collapsed in hours. She tried to delete everything, but it was too late. And me? I got called into the VP's office on Friday. We've been watching you, she said. You've handled everything with professionalism. You kept your head down, did your work. We'd like to promote you, team lead, if you're ready. I said yes. Not because I needed validation, but because I had earned it. That weekend, I walked along the waterfront, coffee in hand, the breeze soft against my skin. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't bracing for the next hit, because it was done. The damage was real. The scars were deep, but I was still standing. And I had the truth. After everything came to light, I expected peace to follow. I thought the silence would feel like freedom, but what came instead was something else. A strange mix of calm and emptiness. For weeks, I kept going to work, doing my job, accepting the congratulations and polite smiles from coworkers who once whispered behind my back. Some even apologized quietly in the hallway, saying they'd had no idea. I just nodded. I didn't need their words. I wasn't doing this for them. Kayla tried to reach out once. A text. Just 5 words. We need to talk. Please. I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. There was nothing left to say. The girl who once strutted through life like the center of the universe had finally been knocked off her pedestal. I didn't need an apology. I didn't want her to cry. I just wanted her out of my life. Daniel left the company a month later. No one said it out loud, but I knew he'd been pushed out. Quietly. Professionally. HR never made a scene, but after that meeting, his days were numbered. Last I heard, he moved to Chicago. Started at a startup with some old friends. He never contacted me again. That was fine. Closure doesn't always need words. It just needs distance. My mom, Cynthia, didn't call. Not once. I think she was embarrassed. Or maybe she still believed Kayla was the victim. That wouldn't surprise me. My whole life, I had tried to earn her approval. I tried to be the responsible one, the one who didn't cause trouble, who brought home awards instead of drama. But when it came down to it, she didn't choose me. Not when it mattered. And once I saw that clearly, it stopped hurting. Barry sent a single email. A strange, short message. Something about being sorry for how things turned out. He never said Kayla lied. Never acknowledged the audio. Just sorry it happened. That was enough for me to know that nothing had changed on their end. They'd rather live in silence than face the truth. But the truth had already done its job. The more time passed, the stronger I felt. My promotion came with more responsibility, more hours, but I didn't mind. I was building something now, something that was mine, untouched by lies or betrayal. I was leading a team, landing big accounts, even mentoring new hires. People looked to me now not just as a coworker, but as a leader. One evening, while walking home, I passed a bookstore and stopped at the window. A journal caught my eye, simple, leather-bound, navy blue. I bought it. That night, I sat on my bed and started writing. Not about Daniel or Kayla. Not about the betrayal. I wrote about me. What I wanted. Where I'd been. Who I was becoming. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when the memories came back. The look on Daniel's face when Kayla made that announcement. The sick twist in my gut when my mother told me to forgive him. The silence of the car ride to Portland. But those moments didn't control me anymore. They were part of the story, not the whole thing. A few months later, my dad and I took a trip. Just the two of us. We drove along the Oregon coast, stopping at little towns, hiking cliffs, eating too much seafood. One night by the fire, I told him how grateful I was. I don't think I ever really said it. I told him, but thank you for taking me in,
For believing me.
He just smiled. I'm sorry I wasn't there more when you were younger. I thought staying out of the way was helping. I nodded. I used to wish you had fought harder.
But now?
I think maybe this moment means more. You showed up when no one else did. He didn't say anything else. He just reached over and held my hand. After we came back, I got a message from a nonprofit in Seattle. They were looking for speakers, women who had overcome personal betrayals, especially from family. Someone had referred me. At first, I hesitated. Why would I reopen all of that in front of strangers? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My story wasn't just mine anymore. Maybe someone else needed to hear it. So I said yes. The night of the event, I stood in front of a small crowd. Not too many people. Just enough to make it real. I told them everything. Not in detail, not with names. Just the truth. About believing in someone and being betrayed. About being abandoned by your own family. About choosing not to stay broken. When I finished, there was silence. Then applause. A woman in the front row had tears in her eyes. Later, she hugged me and whispered, "Thank you. I needed that." That's when I realized something. Revenge felt good. But healing? Healing was better. What Kayla and Daniel did to me, what my family allowed, could have destroyed me. But it didn't. Instead, it made space. Space for better people. For purpose.
For peace.
Now, when I walk past the mirror, I don't see the woman who ran from a broken wedding. I see the woman who stood back up. Who turned silence into power. Seattle's still home. The rain still falls. The city still hums. But I'm different now. Stronger. Sharper. I thought losing everything would be the end. But it was the beginning. My younger brother secretly sold my $9 million farmhouse for just $3 million and called me, saying, "I spent all the money on my girlfriend's business. She needed it more than you." I immediately canceled my trip and rushed home. But when I arrived, I just smiled because the farmhouse he sold was actually... I never thought I'd return to Grandfather Henry's farm like this. But life has a way of dragging you back to places you never planned on seeing again, especially when betrayal forces your hand. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was finishing up a research report on sustainable irrigation techniques in my Denver office. My phone buzzed, and I almost ignored it until I saw the name. Liam. We hadn't talked much in the past few years. He was always chasing his next business idea, and I was too buried in my work to get involved in family matters. But something in my gut told me to answer. "Natalie." Liam's voice was too smug, too casual. "I figure I should let you know, I sold the farm." For a moment, I thought I misheard. "You what?" "The farm. Grandpa's farm. Got $900,000 for it." He said like it was just another deal, not the place where we spent our childhood summers, where Grandfather Henry built his entire life's work. My grip on the phone tightened. "You sold it? Without even talking to me?" Liam sighed, annoyed. "Come on, Natalie. You haven't set foot on that land in years. You're too busy with your scientist life in Denver. The farm was just sitting there collecting dust." My chest burned with anger. "You had no right to do that, Liam." He laughed, a sharp, careless sound. "Actually, I did. I was named executor. That means I get to make the calls." I could barely process the words. "Where's the money?" There was a pause, then a chuckle. I spent it." I went cold. "What do you mean, you spent it?" "My girlfriend, Olivia. Her business needed a boost," Liam said, as if that explained everything. "She had this amazing investment opportunity, and she needed funds fast. I helped her out." I felt like the air had been knocked from my lungs. "You sold our grandfather's farm for half of its real value and blew the money on Olivia's business?" "She needed it more than you," Liam shot back, defensive now. "You don't need the money, Natalie. You have your career, your fancy research projects. What do you care about an old farm?" I ended the call without another word. I didn't trust myself to speak. Within an hour, I had booked the next flight to Austin, Texas. The entire trip, my mind raced. How could Liam do this? He had always been reckless. But this? This wasn't just bad judgment. This was theft. By the time I landed, my anger had turned into something sharper. Determination. He thought he could get away with this. But he didn't know one thing. Grandfather Henry wasn't a fool. And I had a feeling he had seen this coming. When I arrived at the farm, or what was left of it, I felt a wave of emotions. Memories flooded back. Summer mornings feeding the horses, the smell of fresh soil after it rained, the sound of grandfather's laughter echoing from the front porch.
And now,
the land was abandoned, overgrown, the heart of our family sold like it was nothing. I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me. Walter Bennett, my grandfather's longtime lawyer, was waiting when I arrived at his Dallas office the next morning. He looked up from his desk as I entered, his sharp eyes filled with something close to expectation. I was wondering when you'd show up, Natalie, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I didn't waste time. Liam sold the farm. Without my consent. He says he had the right. Walter sighed, tapping his fingers against a thick folder on his desk.
Yes.
I received the notice yesterday. I stared at him. So that's it? He wins. Walter gave a small smile. That depends. Have you read your grandfather's final estate documents? A strange feeling stirred in my chest. I read the will. It left everything to both of us, but Liam was executor. Walter nodded. That's true. But your grandfather was a very careful man.
He slid the folder toward me.
2 weeks before he passed, he filed an amended deed. I hesitated before opening it. The first page immediately caught my eye. Character clause? I read aloud. Walter's expression turned serious. Henry knew Liam's weaknesses. He loved him, but he didn't trust him with the farm. So he added a safeguard. If either of you attempted to sell the farm without the other's agreement, ownership would immediately and irrevocably transfer to the wronged party. I blinked. Are you saying? Yes. Walter leaned back in his chair. The sale is void. The farm is yours, Natalie. A mix of relief and shock washed over me. Liam doesn't know about this, does he? Walter shook his head.
No.
And I'd advise not telling him until we call a legal meeting. I sat back, trying to process it all. Grandfather Henry had known. He had seen Liam's recklessness, his greed. And he had planned for it. I clenched my fists. So what now? Walter checked his watch.
Now?
You get ready. Because once Liam finds out, he's going to fight this. And something tells me he's not going down without a scene. That evening, I drove back to the farm. I stood on the overgrown land, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the empty fields. This farm wasn't just land. It was my grandfather's legacy. It was everything he had built, everything he had left behind. And Liam had tried to throw it away for a quick payout and a selfish dream. I pulled out my phone. Tomorrow, Liam would learn the truth. He thought he had won. He had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind racing with everything that was about to happen. Liam had no idea that his so-called victory was about to collapse right in front of him. And knowing my brother, he wasn't going to take it well. By 10 a.m., I was sitting across from Walter Bennett in his office. He had already arranged a legal meeting, ensuring Liam and his lawyer would be present. I could tell Walter had seen plenty of messy family disputes in his career. But this was personal. Liam arrived 20 minutes late, of course. He strolled in like he owned the place, dressed in an expensive suit that he probably paid for with money he had no right to touch. Olivia followed behind him, her expression set in boredom, clearly annoyed at having to be here. His lawyer, a nervous-looking man barely out of law school, shuffled in behind them, looking overwhelmed. Liam smirked the second he saw me.
Wow, Natalie.
Didn't think you'd care enough to show up. I ignored the jab and gestured toward the empty chair across from me. Sit down. Liam flopped into the chair with an exaggerated sigh. Let's make this quick. I've got better things to do. Walter cleared his throat, ignoring the attitude. Liam, I assume you're aware that Natalie has concerns regarding the sale of your grandfather's farm. Liam rolled his eyes, leaning back. We've been over this. I was the executor. I had every legal right to sell the property. Walter calmly slid a document across the table. Actually, you didn't. Liam frowned but picked it up. As his eyes scanned the words, his smug expression faded. The arrogance drained from his face, and his hands tightened around the paper. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, real fear. What is this? His voice wasn't as confident anymore. Walter steepled his fingers. That is the amended deed your grandfather filed 2 weeks before his passing. It contains a character clause stating that if one of his grandchildren attempted to sell the farm without the other's consent, ownership would automatically and irrevocably transfer to the wronged party. Liam's face paled.
No.
That can't be right. Oh, but it is, I said, my voice steady. The moment you signed that sale agreement, you lost everything. The farm belongs to me now. Liam slammed the document on the table. This is a setup, he snapped. Grandpa wouldn't do this to me. Walter remained calm. Henry Carter knew his grandchildren well, Liam. He knew Natalie would protect the farm, and he knew you, well, let's just say he anticipated your actions. Liam turned to his lawyer, his voice frantic. Do something. The young man shifted in his seat uncomfortably. Legally speaking, the amendment is binding. The sale is void. Olivia crossed her arms, her voice sharp. So, what does that mean? The money is gone. We already spent it. That's your problem, I said, my tone icy cold. Liam's face twisted in frustration as he pushed away from the table and stood up. You can't just take everything from me. I met his glare. I didn't take it. You threw it away. A heavy silence stretched through the room. Liam had lost.
Completely.
Walter sighed and slid another document forward. There's one more issue. As executor, you had a legal duty to uphold the estate's integrity. By selling the farm without Natalie's consent, you violated those duties. He tapped the paper. Effective immediately, you are removed as executor. Liam stared at the paper like it was a death sentence. You're joking. Nope, I said, leaning forward. I'm in charge now. Olivia suddenly stood, grabbing Liam's arm. Liam, we need to go. Liam was frozen in place, still staring at the document. I knew what was going through his mind. He had lost everything. The farm, the money, the control. Walter wasn't done. He picked up another file. One last thing, since the sale is void, that means you owe the estate every single dollar you received from it. Liam visibly swallowed. I don't have the money. I leaned back in my chair. Then we have a problem, don't we? Olivia, clearly furious, yanked on Liam's arm again. Liam, we're leaving. But before they could reach the door, Walter spoke one last time. Oh, and Liam? He turned, shoulders tense. Any attempt to challenge this legally will result in a full estate audit. Walter's tone was calm but firm, which means every single financial transaction you made as executor will be investigated. Liam's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what that meant. Every shady deal, every dollar he had funneled into Olivia's business, exposed. He didn't say another word. He just stormed out, Olivia trailing behind him, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. As the door swung shut behind them, I finally exhaled. It was over. At least, I thought it was. That night, I sat on Grandfather Henry's old porch, staring out at the land, the cool Texas air settling around me. I should have felt relief, but something nagged at me. Liam was reckless. But he wasn't stupid. He had to know this was a possibility. He had to know Grandfather Henry would have planned for this. Then why was he so desperate? My phone buzzed. A text from Liam. We need to talk. I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. This wasn't over. I stared at Liam's message for a long time. We need to talk. A part of me wanted to ignore it. I had won. The farm was legally mine, and Liam had lost every ounce of control. But I knew my brother. He didn't just walk away, not without a backup plan. Finally, I replied, meet me at the farmhouse. 1 hour. By the time I arrived, the sky had darkened, and the air smelled of damp earth, the kind of scent that always came before a storm. The land stretched out in front of me, the fences still broken, the crops overgrown. This place had been abandoned for too long. Liam pulled up in his SUV 10 minutes late, his headlights cutting through the shadows. He got out slowly, looking different this time, tired, nervous. Olivia wasn't with him. For once, it was just the two of us. He shoved his hands into his pockets, avoiding my eyes. You got what you wanted. I leaned against the porch railing. Did I? Liam let out a bitter laugh. Spare me the lecture, Natalie. You think you're the hero in all this. He gestured at the land. You left. You had your career, your research, your perfect life. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who took care of everything. I tilted my head, watching him carefully. You didn't take care of anything, Liam. You sold grandfather's farm for a quick payday and burned through the money like it was nothing.
His jaw tightened.
I was trying to build something. I crossed my arms. And where is it now? He didn't answer. And that told me everything. Something in my gut twisted. Liam, this isn't just about the farm, is it? He hesitated, his eyes darting away, and for the first time in a long time, I saw it. Fear. I stepped closer. How bad is it? Liam ran a hand through his hair, looking anywhere but at me. I borrowed against grandfather's other accounts. I felt my stomach drop. What? He exhaled sharply. The estate's tax accounts, the maintenance funds, the savings, everything. I pulled from them, thinking I could pay it back before anyone noticed. His voice cracked. But the investment tanked, the developer went bankrupt, and now he let out a hollow laugh. Now it's gone. I felt physically sick. How much? His voice barely rose above a whisper. $750,000. The world tilted for a second. I pressed my fingers against my forehead, forcing myself to think. So, that's why you were so desperate to sell the farm. Liam nodded, looking miserable. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. I closed my eyes. And Olivia? His laugh was humorless.
She left.
Took what little she could and ran the second she realized there was nothing left. A long silence stretched between us. I should have walked away. I should have told Liam this was his mess to fix. But then I thought of Grandfather Henry, of the way he had always believed in second chances. And despite everything, Liam was still my brother. I pulled out my phone and dialed Walter. He answered on the second ring. I need to see you, I said.
Now.
An hour later, Liam and I sat in Walter's office. Walter, unshaken as always, didn't seem surprised when I told him everything. Instead, he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Your grandfather knew this was a possibility, Walter said, sliding the file toward me. So, he planned for it. I flipped through the pages, my heart racing. Insurance policies, financial safeguards, legal contingencies, things Grandfather Henry had set up long before he passed. Walter tapped one document. This is an insurance policy covering unauthorized estate investments. If triggered, it allows for recovery of up to $800,000. Liam let out a breath like he'd been punched. So, we're covered? Walter's gaze hardened. Not exactly. There are conditions. Liam braced himself. Of course there are. Walter leaned forward. First, you must sign an official admission of wrongdoing. That means formally acknowledging your misuse of estate funds. Liam stiffened. And if I don't? Walter's face didn't change. Then Natalie will have no choice but to file a legal claim against you, which would trigger a full forensic audit of the estate's finances. He paused. Given the evidence, it's likely you'd be charged with fraud. Liam's face drained of color. Fraud? Yes, Walter said simply. And that would mean prison time. Liam's hand shook slightly as he wiped it over his face. And the other conditions? Walter folded his hands. You will be required to attend financial counseling at your own expense. And you will have no further involvement in the estate. Ever. Liam turned to me. His voice wasn't angry anymore, it was almost pleading. And you're okay with this? I held his gaze. I don't want to see you in prison, Liam. But I'm not going to protect you from the consequences of what you did. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly he nodded. Fine. Walter slid the admission document forward. Liam took the pen with shaking hands and signed. And just like that, it was over. We stepped outside into the night air. Liam stood by his car, staring out at the city skyline. I don't know what to do now, he admitted. I hesitated before answering. You start over. Liam let out a weak laugh.
How?
I sighed, studying him. The brother I had grown up with, the one who had lost himself chasing the wrong things. The farm still needs fixing, I said after a pause. You could help. His head snapped toward me, eyes wide with surprise. You'd let me? I met his gaze. You're still my brother, Liam. But this isn't about money anymore. If you want a second chance, you have to earn it. He didn't answer right away, but after a long pause, he nodded. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fix what was broken. The days after the meeting with Walter felt heavy, filled with long silences and the weight of everything that had happened. I had spent so long angry at Liam, convinced that he would never change, that it felt strange to see him now, humbled, uncertain, and lost. But there we were, standing on Grandfather Henry's farm, staring at the overgrown fields, the broken fences, and the house that had once been filled with life. "I barely recognize it," Liam muttered. I glanced at him. "Yeah, well, that's what happens when someone tries to sell a place instead of taking care of it." Liam exhaled sharply, but didn't argue. He wasn't fighting anymore. And for the first time in years, I could see something shifting in him. We spent the next week clearing out the old barn, fixing the fences, and assessing the damage caused by years of neglect and bad decisions. Liam wasn't used to this kind of work, and at first he struggled. But he showed up every morning, and to my surprise, he never complained. One evening, after an exhausting day of repairing the porch steps, I found him sitting on the front steps, staring out at the land as the sun dipped below the horizon. The golden light cast long shadows over the fields, the same view that Grandfather Henry used to love. "I used to hate this place," Liam admitted, his voice quiet, hesitant. "I thought it was a trap. A reminder of everything I didn't want to be." I sat down beside him, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "And now?" He was silent for a long time before sighing. "Now, I think I get it. Grandpa wasn't trying to hold us back. He was giving us something that actually mattered." I nodded, watching the wind move through the tall grass. He always thought 5 moves ahead. Liam chuckled, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Yeah. And I never thought past the next dollar sign." The next few months passed in a rhythm of hard work and quiet realizations. Liam stuck with it, something I honestly hadn't expected. At first, I kept my guard up, waiting for him to give up, to run when things got hard. But he didn't. He learned how to fix the equipment, how to plant crops properly, how to care for the land the way Grandfather had. And slowly, I realized that he wasn't just doing it for me. He was doing it for himself. One afternoon, we stood in the middle of the restored barn, the scent of fresh hay in the air. Liam wiped his hands on his jeans, glancing around. "It actually looks like a real farm again." "That's because it is." He let out a deep breath, nodding. "Feels different." I studied him. "You feel different?" Liam hesitated before nodding.
"Yeah."
For the first time, I believed him. A year after everything had fallen apart, we held a ceremony in Grandfather Henry's honor. We invited neighbors, old friends, and the few people in town who had known him well. Liam stood next to me as we unveiled a memorial plaque near the farmhouse. It simply read, "Henry Carter, a man who built more than land." As the sun set over the farm, I realized something. Grandfather had always planned for this. Not just for the land, not just for the money, but for us. He had known that Liam and I would never truly see eye to eye until something forced us to. He had built in safeguards, knowing Liam's weaknesses, but he had left the door open for redemption. And Liam had finally stepped through it. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I found Liam sitting on the porch, watching the stars. "Still thinking about running back to Austin?" I asked. He smirked.
"Nah."
"Turns out I like the quiet." I sat down beside him, letting the cool night air settle around us. "Do you think Grandfather knew this would happen?" Liam asked after a while. I thought about it before answering.
"Yeah."
"I think he knew exactly what he was doing." Liam sighed, a small smile on his lips.
"Yeah."
"Me too." And for the first time in a long time, we sat there not as enemies, not as rivals, but as family.